Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, March 15th regular meeting of the Walnut Creek City Council. The City Council is conducting this meeting from the City Council chamber, and staff are complying with the current regulations of the California Department of Public Health and Cal OSHA for safe indoor meetings. Mayor Pro Tem Silva and Council Member Wilk are attending the meeting via teleconference. Rest assured, they are on the teleconference. They will not be shown on camera unless they're actively speaking. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54953B, the public shall have the opportunity to address the City Council at the teleconference locations. All votes during the teleconferencing session will be conducted by roll call vote. The teleconference locations are accessible to the public. Members of the public may provide live, remote, oral public comment via the city's Zoom video conferencing platform or may attend the meeting in person. As some attendees may be participating in their first Walnut Creek City Council meeting or their first teleconference meeting, I wanted to welcome everyone and talk briefly about the public comment process. For each agenda item, there will be an opportunity for public comment on the item. Thus, if you desire to speak on an item on the agenda this evening, please hold your comments until the council considers that item. Additionally, we have a section on the agenda entitled Public Communications, which is for public comments for items not on the agenda. Any comments during public communication should not relate to an item that is on the agenda this evening. Consistent with Section 9.5 of the Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be initially allocated for public communications for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the open session portion of the meeting if necessary. When I open the public comment period, please use the raised hand feature or press *9 if you're connected by audio only. We ask that everyone who wishes to speak on an item, please use this raised hand feature to state your intent to speak when the item is called. If you're attending in person, please complete a speaker identification card and line up behind the lectern right over here at the appropriate time. Wait your turn, and once brought into the meeting, state your name and city of residence for the record. Please note that in-person public comments will be taken before any remote public comments. Also, please keep in mind that this is a city business meeting. The City Council has adopted rules of decorum to ensure that meetings are conducted efficiently and effectively, and that all members of the public have a full, fair, and equal opportunity to be heard. All remarks should be addressed to the City Council. Please do not use profanity during your comments. Given the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased number of speakers that have wanted to make comments on various issues during our meetings and consistent with city policies related to public comments, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make your remarks. The Zoom feed for each speaker will cut off automatically at 2 minutes. The council will accept oral comments. Written comments submitted and received up to 2 hours before the meeting have been posted to the city's website for public review and are included in the meeting record but will not be separately read into the record. To provide a live remote public comment, join the Zoom video conference meeting. The meeting ID and password are, the webinar ID is 882-6562-1023, and the passcode is 062290. Should you choose to not provide comments but would like to view this meeting, you may do so in one of the following ways. YouTube Live, visit the City of Walnut Creek's YouTube channel. Cable broadcast, Comcast Channel 28 in Incorporated Walnut Creek, Rossmore Channel 26, Wave Channel 1028, and AT&T Uverse Channel 99. You can also live stream the meeting online on the city's website. At this time, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, will the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Darling?
Here.
Councilmember Haskew?
Here.
Councilmember Wilk?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva?
Here.
Mayor Francois?
Here. Next on the agenda is we are honored to present a proclamation recognizing American Red Cross Month. And I'd like to read the proclamation and then invite Tom Terrell with Red Cross to the lectern to accept the proclamation. Whereas in times of crisis, people in the city of Walnut Creek come together to care for one another, this humanitarian spirit is part of the foundation of our community and is exemplified by American Red Cross volunteers and donors. March is American Red Cross Month, a special time to honor the kindness of our volunteers and neighbors who aid families in need every day as they carry out the organization's 140-year mission of preventing and alleviating suffering. Whereas despite the ongoing challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, people have stepped up to help others in needs. Whether it was responding to this year's record-breaking wildfires, horrific tornadoes, extreme winter storm cold waves, or summer heat waves, volunteers continued to roll up their sleeves to give blood when our country faced a severe blood shortage. Whereas last year in Contra Costa County, 518 families affected by 130 devastating home fires relied on the American Red Cross and our partners for comfort and hope, providing emotional support, addressing immediate needs, and helping families recover with emergency financial assistance or community resources. Through our Sound the Alarm program, American Red Cross made 108 households safer by helping residents create a fire evacuation plan. Whereas Contra Costa County residents donated 17,277 units of life-saving blood, hosted 788 blood drives, including working several partner-sponsored diverse blood drives to help the fight against sickle cell anemia. 8,486 local community work, let's make sure I get that right, 8,486 local community members took classes to learn skills like first aid and CPR that saved lives. 910 military members and their families received support and services, and humanitarian aid was provided internationally. Whereas Red Cross volunteers deployed 552 times, dedicating 61,930 volunteer hours to assist neighbors in California and around the country during 41 different disaster relief operations of all sizes, including wildfires in Oregon and California and Hurricane Ida. And whereas their work to prevent and alleviate human suffering is vital to strengthening our community's resilience, we dedicate this month of March to all those who continue to advance the noble legacy of American Red Cross founder Clara Barton, who lived by her words. You must never think of anything except the need and how to meet it. We ask others to join in this commitment to give back in our community. Now, therefore, I, Matt Francois, Mayor of the City of Walnut Creek, on behalf of the Walnut Creek City Council, do hereby proclaim March 2022 as American Red Cross Month and encourage all Americans to support the American Red Cross organization and its noble humanitarian mission.
Mayor Francois and members of the council, city staff, I'm Tom Terrell, 278 Nob Hill Drive here in Walnut Creek. Longtime Walnut Creek resident, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I get the pleasure of being a community partnership volunteer and also trained to work in the EOC in the county when those times that it's opened up, which is kind of a daunting thing to learn what to do. But I really appreciate you taking the time to do this tonight. It's been a very challenging time. 90% of the work that's done by the Red Cross is done by volunteers. And so these blood drives you talked about in Rossmore and throughout the community were just amazing this year, that we were able to do that in a safe environment, trained staff to deal with COVID issues, and we're able to successfully do those things. We look forward to working with city staff again on training. We were very close before COVID to have a major training exercise on opening a shelter when there is an emergency or an earthquake. Walnut Creek is going to be at the hub of that effort if that ever happens, hopefully not. But we need our city staff to be ready to go and the buildings evaluated and know where all the supplies are. So these things continue, and we look forward to getting ramped up with our classes again at the high school level and throughout the community, and just really appreciate your support of that. It would be remiss on my part not to mention that the Red Cross is actively involved in Ukraine and throughout Eastern Europe today. I was on their website. It's just incredible what's happening and the amount of, it's really a one-stop kind of place that people think of in these kinds of situations. And so with that, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terrell. Mr. Terrell, I have be the proclamation. Next on the agenda is the consent calendar. Does any council member wish to pull any item for discussion? Not seeing any in the chambers. How about on Zoom?
There are no hands up. I'm sorry. There is a hand raised on Zoom. And I believe staff also wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, staff is recommending that the council pull from consent item 2C. I have a brief report that I would want to make and a recommendation to the City Council.
Okay, I will definitely hear that report, and I'll first ask if any member of the public wishes to comment on an item other than C, which has been pulled. Please come to the lectern.
H. Hi, Jan Warren, Walnut Creek resident, and I wasn't sure how you could do Zoom, so I hustled down here. So now I know you can actually do it. That's good. I wanted to pull H because it's the 2021 annual progress report on our housing element, and I had some questions I would, maybe you could just direct me so I don't have to take up time, but the 97 subsidized affordable units at 699YV, I was not clear when that is going to be. I know they haven't started, and it's hard with the new element coming out to know where we're getting credit for what. And the other is the tax-exempt bonds on the Stone Ridge apartments. I wasn't aware of that last year in February. It's very exciting, and I went to look on the Google, and it showed luxury apartments, 101 Hogan Court, so I'm not sure I'm in the right place or sure or know when that's going to happen, when the transfer and how the process is. Are people going to be able to stay in while they remodel? And all of that. And lastly, just a comment on the 106 above moderate income housing units that we permitted buildings permits for. Those we already have more than enough of those, of course. And the 24 affordable accessory dwelling units, 17 of those are moderate, 4 are low, and 3 are very low. So we have a lot of work still to do. So maybe I can connect with Shirlena on the answers.
We can definitely get you those answers, Ms. Warren. Thank you for coming. Any other member of the public wish to pull an item from the consent calendar?
No, I just want to say something about number D. You have affordable housing here. You have a program. You've allocated funds. I've watched the process for 10 years. But I never got an opportunity to even fill out an application at Trinity Center. In fact, I was threatened with arrest if I went to meetings because they put it in a bank that they got me thrown out of and turned it on me. And so while I'm eating out of garbage cans over here, you're giving money to the Diablo Arts, putting nice pavement out there, and I'm getting beaten up and thrown through windows. I know Matt hasn't seen it, but, you know, Llewellyn, you remember my broken nose and my broken finger? You know, the guy that did that, one of the guys that did that to me, they shot him dead in Concord. My story's pretty real. My friend was killed in Barcelona, which is Rich Carlson's, raised him. My car blows up on the freeway, and I'm sued by Russians down the street, burned down my attorney's office. Not only did I lose the case against Albert DiCino, I lost it against AT&T, which is the whole section of 9/11 that you don't understand, that I'm part of. 22 years almost of this. And so I fill out applications with the county housing, and they won't give me any services. No phone calls returned, nothing, zero. If it's a federal program, they're supposed to accommodate me. I never get an opportunity. I'm going to die at $700 a month because I'm so deep in debt with tax and back support. I've been wiped out. Every nickel. I had $1 million trust managed by David Rockefeller. They killed my grandfather before they killed Kennedy, his client.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Any other member of the public wish to pull an item from the consent calendar?
Mayor, we do have 2 speakers on Zoom.
Okay, let's bring them in.
Ann Ling.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. Contra Costa Animal Services has drafted a city-county animal services agreement, which has been sent out to the 18 cities for review.
Ms. Ling,
This agreement,
excuse me, are you commenting on an item that's on the consent calendar?
no,
Okay,
I'm
then,
not.
then the appropriate time would be during public communications, and we're going to get to that next. So that's for
Oh, I
items that are not
apologize.
on the agenda. No problem.
Next speaker is Gilda Gonzalez.
Good evening, can you hear me?
And good evening, Ms. Gonzalez. We can, and 2C has been pulled already, and I'll accept
Right.
public comments after the staff. gives
That's
its
what I would like to
presentation.
do. Thank you so much.
You bet. Please tell me there are no others that wish to pull an item from the consent calendar.
There are no additional hands raised.
Okay, then 2C has been pulled. We're going to hear a staff report on that after we take action on the other consent calendar items. Ms. Warren had questions on 2D. I'm going to see if staff is available. I'm sorry, 2H. I'm going to see if staff is available now online to answer those.
We are bringing in community development staff. Just one moment.
Good evening. This is Jeff Schwab, Interim Community Development Director. We'll be happy to reach out to Jan Warren and respond to her specific questions with regard to the project. 699YVR is working towards securing additional funding from the state. So we don't have a precise timeline on that, but we'll continue to keep her informed. The Stone Ridge project, we'll check into that and let her know as well on the remaining questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. And just to confirm the housing report that will go to the state there, that won't be finalized yet. So there's still an opportunity for you to discuss that with Ms. Warren and make any adjustments if they're needed. It's not a final report yet.
That's correct. We're still fine tuning it for submission to HCD, state HCD.
Terrific. Then I'll entertain a motion on consent calendar items A through K with the exception of C.
Well, you did all the hard work. I'm going to make that motion.
And I'll second that.
Terrific. And Ms. Martinez, can you please call the roll?
Councilmember Haskew.
Aye.
Councilmember Darling.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilk.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Aye.
Mayor Francois.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, then to item 2C, Mr. Mattis.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. As the council will recall, members of the public have provided oral and written testimony regarding the proposed buffer zone ordinance at a number of recent meetings. Some of those comments have addressed both the need for noise regulation of excessive noise, and other comments have been made regarding the ambient noise in the area of the Planned Parenthood facility. Staff and our office have considered the noise regulation issue further, including doing ambient noise measurements around the Planned Parenthood facility, after the last council meeting. And it is our recommendation that we think that further monitoring and analysis of the noise issue would be helpful before the city ordinance regulates noise issues. And so to that end, I provided at the back of the room this evening a revised version of the ordinance that was scheduled to be adopted tonight, but would need to be introduced again if we change it. And it is the same ordinance that the council had at the last meeting, except for the deletion of the noise provisions that were in the ordinance. And so the 8-foot buffer zone would still be there, the 100-foot radius in which the 8-foot buffer zone would be applied would still be there. And if the council were to accept this recommendation this evening, then you would reintroduce the ordinance this evening, and then you would adopt it, if that was your desire, at your upcoming council meeting. We do believe that some further monitoring and analysis would be helpful. Planned Parenthood has made it very clear that the noise issues are significant to them. Some of the other commenters have also raised issues about their ability to be able to protest in a manner that is allowed under the Constitution. And so we think getting additional data and presenting it to the council would be the appropriate way to proceed. And that's our recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mattis. Any questions of Mr. Mattis?
I have a question, Mayor.
Councilmember Wilk.
Thank you, Mayor. And Steve, I just wanted to ask, what did you find? What were those data points you found? Can you be any more specific on why that recommendation would be the case?
Sure. When we proposed the ordinance, we looked at standards that had been used in other buffer zone ordinances and that had been in some of the instances where there had been legal challenges, and they did speak to shouting and conversations at the shouting level. We looked at that. We looked at the appropriate dB levels, and that equated to a 60 dB level, decibel level. And when we went out and did the ambient noise tests in the area, we found that the ambient noise, because the Planned Parenthood facility is adjacent to the freeway, is actually 67 dB on the times that we monitored it. And when there's actually additional traffic on the road in front of Planned Parenthood, it can get up above 70 dB. And so we think it's appropriate to look at the issue further, both from the standpoint of the potential impacts that the excessive noise may be having on the operations of the facilities and the patients there, but at the same time having a standard that does factor in particular the ambient noise level from the freeway that's adjacent to the Planned Parenthood facility.
Thank you. And do we know how loud decibels it is when somebody's using amplification like a megaphone?
We don't. We know that we are aware that, you know, shouting can get up above 70. Amplification can likely do that. 70 is, you know, there are various standards that have for the dBs, but one of the issues would be like vacuum cleaners are close to 70 dB. So it depends on how close the person is, how high the volume is on the amplified material. The town does have, the city does have a noise ordinance right now which does regulate excessive noise, but it's written as more of a true kind of nuisance ordinance, and it has much broader applicability. And it may not be the appropriate fit for a medical facility such as Planned Parenthood. And so we want to look at that very carefully and look at whether or not the city's noise ordinance itself that already exists would be workable there. I have reservations about that. I think it would be better to have a specific noise regulation that is particularly tailored to a medical facility. The courts have recognized that those types of regulations are permissible and do not constitute an infringement of free speech, but there has to be a strong foundation, a strong evidentiary basis for that, as well as the need for that type of regulation. And so those are some of the things that we think doing some more monitoring and some additional analysis would allow us to present additional information to the council and to members of the public for consideration.
Okay, thank you. No more questions on my end.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva, I can't see you, but do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you, though, to staff. I'll have a comment later.
Sure. Thank you. And now I'll open public comment on consent calendar item 2C. I'm going to first invite any members in the chamber to come to the lectern if they'd like to make a comment. Now would be the time to raise your hand or press star 9 on if you're connected by Zoom and you would like to make a comment on item 2C.
Is this a time to comment on that ordinance?
Yes,
On that aspect of the ordinance or the entire ordinance?
everything dealing with the ordinance.
Okay.
Yep.
James Cook from Antioch. My point tonight was going to just be this ordinance that you drew up last couple weeks. Speaks to my point from my last couple weeks of comments to the council that no one has went out there with a decimal reader before you came up with the decimal equivalent. I've talked to your 2 code officers that you have in the city. They're the only 2 that enforce the code. Asked them about the noise ordinance, and they do not have a decibel measurement in the city as it is right now, according to the officer. I believe it was Mike or Matt, whoever I talked to. Just as a concerned citizen, asked them about what it was before I even went down there to protest so that I would be a law-abiding citizen and not cause problems. There was no equivalent, except for if you can hear me from 50 feet away, you're too loud. That was basically it. There was no meter. So this is all brand new to us as citizens, okay? I went down there last 2 Tuesdays and Friday, and the ambient noise around me at 8 a.m., when there's no traffic coming in yet, was 67 decibels. During the 9 to 11 o'clock hour was about 85 with me speaking through an amplifier, 85. The ambient noise was around 70. So being amplified by just speaking, not yelling, but speaking to the people there, it's not a very loud decibel difference. And so I'm just trying to do my due diligence so I don't come off sounding kind of crazy. But I do think that it is impossible to give us our freedoms as American citizens by putting that on there as is. That I didn't know you guys were speaking about that tonight. So that's what my comment is.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Next speaker.
Hi, Don Blythe. Pleasantly surprised that you are taking a second look at this. I came tonight to challenge you on that. And again, I've told you in the past, Mr. Mattis, I'm impressed with the way you handle things, and I'm impressed tonight. I think taking a second look at this was a great idea because I think the way it's written is absolutely absurd. We're not at a restaurant out in front of the abortion clinic. We're at a place where we need to reach out to people. A comment was made last meeting that, well, there are laws, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That is not the law. You can yell fire in a crowded theater if there's a fire. And our ministry out there is to warn women going in there that there is a regular occurrence of ambulances, that there is a regular occurrence of trouble at that building. And so we reach out to those people, and it does require that we talk beyond a restaurant level voice to get over the sound of the freeway and the noise. So I appreciate you guys taking a second look at that, and I'm impressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blythe. Any other speakers in the chamber would like to address the council on this item? Mr. Bennett, welcome.
Hey, my name's Pete Bennett. I'll give you a story about life. In 1998, my son was in the hospital, about to have a baby. Wife was screaming. All of a sudden, I'm running across the room, catching my son. I delivered him in John Muir. Nobody was there. So I have 2 boys. Haven't seen them for a long time. Real long time. So long, it's been a decade. They walked into the arms of Walnut Creek officer Tony Keeler. And then 3 days later, my son walked into his arms and never came back. And then my other son went in a car when I got arrested. It was a setup. They were in my house over here, connected to former officer Dick Grossman, Walnut Creek officer, and his girlfriend Lisa Trapani, an attorney that I'm going to get disbarred. And that's it. And then 2 weeks later, my car was deliberately totaled, and I'm out $10,000 on that, and I still can't get a police report out of Chief Aldrich, Huber, and Christensen. You took my sons away from me, the ones I gave life to. You have a captain named Captain Neil Stratton, whose wife has been missing since 1997, and the kids disappeared also in 1997. You have a kidnapping case. And down in Danville, my friend's daughters, Alice and Bayless, a family that I'm aware of, their daughter's missing. And my friend up here, his son is missing. Her son is missing. And my other friend's half-brother's missing. I know too many missing people to be a coincidence.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Next speaker.
Good evening, Council. I'm from Martinez, born and raised there. I spoke before on the issue with Planned Parenthood. It's good that you're bringing up this proposal to relook on the sound. I worked
Sir,
in
could
many.
you state your name for the
Sergio Raya.
Thank you.
And I worked in many noisy places, very noisy. If you think that our level is very high, the level of that freeway as well as on the road itself is much higher than us, really. If you really want it quiet, you would probably need a building around that building to keep it quiet the way you speak of the decibel level. We all pledge to the United States of America and God. That's why we want to be here to serve these women and help them, because we believe in God and saving lives. It's about being a neighbor, and it's about sharing that love, and it's always there for people that come in there in distress and helping them as well think this out. It's nothing more but what we were all brought up with, every single one of us here in this chamber, the golden rule. It's about life, and that's what we're here for. We're not here to take anybody down, but we're here to give that opportunity for all lives. There's so much issues going on throughout the world. Ukraine, that's one concern, but we need to concentrate ourselves as well as in our neighborhood about giving life and keeping life. That's what we're there for, to support these women, men, families that want to start life and decide not to. That's what we're there for. Thank you for rethinking this on that decibel level, because you will see that even me talking to you right now is probably pretty much to 60 decibels, if not. There's a level in the state of in California, that level's 85 to start with ear protection. And from there, it goes up to higher than that, over 120. Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Mr. Ralio. Any other members in the chamber would like to address the council? Not seeing any, so let's go to Zoom, Susie.
Sure. First speaker is Rand Shritan.
Hi, I'm Rand Critton. I actually, Mayor Francois and Ms. Darling, I know you folks from the community cleanup. I do the safety talk for there and part of that whole group. I'm also a Planned Parenthood escort. I'm one of the folks that show up and help the folks that are trying to use the facility. It's a safety issue for me. It's actually something that is really important in the sense of making sure that these folks feel safe and feel protected. And one of the things that happens is you're talking about your noise ordinance. We've got the microphones, the amplified mics that are being used by the folks that are doing the protesting. And it's not so much the noise, although that's really important. It's what they're saying and the way in which they are really trying to agitate a situation where the people that are there that are already upset are getting more upset by what's being said and the sound that is coming out there. They're also walking across the driveway, trying to handle their pamphlets to the folks. And it's really it's turning into a real safety issue because we're almost like they're trying to get in the way of the people as they're coming in and out. And that's a real concern, almost as much as the noise is. The noise is hard because of what they're saying. And the murderers comments or the working for the devil comments, those are real frustrations. And it's also just really unfortunate just in terms of how often they say that and what they're saying to these folks that are there. No one that I've escorted in has wanted to have an abortion. It's something that it's not they wake up in the morning and decide to do. It's a really tough choice. They get agitated and they get really concerned when they've got people talking to them like that. So thanks for your time. Think about this sound ordinance. I think it's really important.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Next speaker, Gilda Gonzalez.
Can you hear me?
We can. Good evening, Ms. Gonzalez.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gilda Gonzalez, CEO of Planned Parenthood Northern California. The presence of these anti-abortion protesters outside our clinic are generating many safety concerns. And I am pretty disturbed to hear some of the protesters that are there tonight claiming like they're doing something great for our patients. And I can attest they are not. Our patients are well informed. And let me clarify for the protesters in the room there tonight. You think you're doing something good for our patients, you are not. You are bothering them. You are not educating them. They do not feel care or comfort from you. And so the only way that we can provide peace and security for our patients who are seeking care that they need and want is to support the buffer zone. I am disappointed about the change, but I respect the city attorney's guidance to you all. I would ask for you to support the remaining of the language on the ordinance, but also to expedite the study on the noise level so we can quickly resolve and add back this critical aspect of protection for our patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Allison.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Okay, great. Good evening. Thank you so much for hearing my comments. I actually just had one question as a point of clarification. You mentioned that because the proposed ordinance was going to be amended to eliminate the noise ordinance portion of it, that it would be reintroduced this evening. So I have a question for the panel. Would tonight's be the first reading and then the matter would have to be brought before the city council again in 2 weeks for a second reading and the vote to adopt the ordinance? And then I also just wanted to commend the city attorney. I know I've written to you relentlessly over this particular issue and given you several legal memorandums and points to consider. So I admire you for taking those points into consideration, and I urge you to do further follow-up and really research whether or not the noise ordinance it would be constitutional in this particular location.
And ma'am,
Thank you.
we'll get a response to your question. Can you please state your last name for the record too?
Certainly, Allison Aranda.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Robin Pepino.
Hi, am I muted now?
You're unmuted. We can hear you. Good evening.
Perfect. I'm Robin Papano-Coons. I'm a weekly volunteer as a client escort at Planned Parenthood. And amplified sound and shouting by the protesters is a huge part of the safety problems that we encounter. We and everybody around encounter. I strongly support quickly implementing the sound limitations that you guys are going to study. If people can continue to use sound amplification and shout at people who are trying to access health centers or health services at 8 feet away, it creates no improvement for the safety of all involved. Drivers entering and leaving are distracted and clients are intimidated. If the protesters can be heard inside the health center, as sometimes can happen with their sound amplification and their shouting, then they're too loud. So thank you for considering this, and I hope that it's resolved relatively quickly.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker.
Next speaker, OG Stragotz.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Great, thank you. Good evening. I'm OG Strogatz, a Walnut Creek resident and a volunteer patient escort at our local Planned Parenthood clinic. I wish to convey my unwavering support for a strong ordinance to establish a protest-free buffer zone around the clinic. The presence of anti-choice protesters outside the Walnut Creek Health Center has consistently generated safety concerns caused by blockages to the public right-of-way. The protesters also harass clinic clients, their drivers, clinic staff, and volunteers, often with sound amplification. They distract vehicular traffic passing by. It is appalling to me that Planned Parenthood Northern California has felt compelled for years to recruit and maintain a team of volunteer parking lot patient escorts, simply so people can feel safe and welcome as they enter and exit a clinic providing skilled, compassionate care. I am particularly concerned about the protesters' use of sound amplification to harangue patients, their drivers, and anyone else in the vicinity of the clinic parking lot. There is unequivocally no need for it. Over the course of 2 years, I have observed the protesters speaking with one another, with clinic patients and their drivers, without raised voices. My fellow parking lot volunteers and I similarly have had no need to raise our voices to converse with patients, their drivers, or one another. I find it curious that with the buffer zone ordinance under consideration, sound amplification now becomes a priority for the protesters. I'm counting on you. Please don't be fooled. Thank you for your commitment to our collective safety and well-being.
Thank you, Ms. Strogatz. Any other speakers on Zoom? Ms. Martinez.
Mayor, there are no additional hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, so we'll close the public comment on this item. I'll bring it back to my colleagues if they have any further questions of Mr. Mattis or any other staff member. Councilmember Darling.
I think just the one question relative to this.
Correct.
We reintroduce this tonight. There's a
Yeah.
second reading.
So if the council were to reintroduce or to introduce the revised ordinance this evening, which removes the noise regulations, then we would introduce it this evening and it would come back for council consideration of adoption at your next meeting.
Thank you. And in the meantime, the city's existing noise ordinances would continue to be in effect.
That's correct, as well as the trespass ordinances and the existing state laws that are applicable right now.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva, it looked like you had a question.
I did. I had a couple of questions. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the recommendation to reassess the sound or volume issue. The city attorney, are we allowed to regulate the volume of sound, conversation, yelling, talking?
The courts have recognized that in certain instances, for instance, related to medical facilities, that and primary schools, if you will, that there is an interest in regulating noise so that it's not excessive. The city does have existing noise regulations from a business standpoint and from a disturbing the peace standpoint, but the courts have recognized that there is an ability to regulate noise under certain circumstances or when it relates to essentially sensitive areas. So if you think hospitals, medical facilities, elementary schools, et cetera.
And this is a medical or healthcare facility, so it does qualify for this consideration.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Mattis? No, so why don't we start with deliberations? I'll start with my colleagues in the chamber. Councilmember Darling.
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that went into the ordinance in the last 2 weeks. I continue to believe this is an important safety issue here, and if we do adopt tonight the ordinance, or if we do introduce the ordinance as amended, I would urge us to return quickly to the issue of sound, because we need to find an appropriate level so that we can protect the peace of the medical facility at hand.
Councilmember Haskew.
I'm just going to say that I believe that it was the right thing to do to rethink it, and I appreciate the thought that went into that decision, as well as the fact that I agree with you. This isn't just like a high school football field where you can yell and do whatever you want. You have to respect everybody's rights and everybody's sensitivities. So thank you for trying to come up with a better way to measure how we can do that effectively.
Councilmember Welk.
Thank you, and I appreciate our city attorney providing that information. I'm concerned about removing the noise portion, but I understand the reason for the need for additional studying the noise as recommended by the city attorney. I have to say that when I was there on several different occasions, I could hear people just fine protesting 25 feet away. They weren't shouting using a megaphone. I could hear them fine. So I don't think they need to use a megaphone to get that to be heard. And I would also recommend expediting bringing this back upon the study that's needed to happen, and that we can then add that decibel level amount in, and also add additional that we would not allow for amplification of noise as well. So I would be in favor of that. But upon recommendation of the city attorney and the understanding of why this is needed, I would recommend the ordinance as it is amended and then have it brought back to us.
Thank you, Councilmember Welk. Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to city staff for the consideration of these additional issues. I appreciate it. I continue, like my colleagues, to be fully supportive of the buffer zone. I recognize the need to assess the question of the noise level and what that metric will need to be. But I think what we are doing with the ordinance is actually ensuring not only safety and security of all involved, but also guaranteeing the right to access to healthcare, while also guaranteeing the right to free speech. And I think we will find that, as many of us have discovered, that walking along Oakland Boulevard, even given the freeway noise, does not preclude having a conversation in conversational levels with someone 8 to 10 feet away.
Thank you, colleagues. And I'm in agreement. I'm supportive of the buffer zone ordinance. I am concerned that, well, my first and foremost concern is with the safety of people trying to access the clinic, as well as the rights of people to exercise their First Amendment rights. So I believe we balance that with the buffer ordinance part. I am not in favor of people using loud means of communication near a medical facility. That, to me, seems like if we need to take another step and regulate that, I'm prepared to do that. I appreciate the city attorney providing us the option to do further analysis and study of the conditions there and taking appropriate action as circumstances warrant. But for tonight, I'm prepared to support the amended ordinance. And with that, I would entertain a motion to introduce the amended ordinance.
Go ahead. I wanted to introduce the ordinance as amended here tonight that prohibits individuals from harassing, intimidating, or obstructing persons seeking access to a reproductive health care facility.
Second.
And Mayor and Council, for the record, this would be to waive reading and introduce.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Councilmember Darling?
Yes.
Councilmember Haskew?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilk?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva?
Aye.
Mayor Francois?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Mayor, I have a question. Do we need to provide direction on what we mean by expeditiously returning to us with information on the sound levels?
Yeah, I'd turn to staff and see what is a realistic time period to come back with information.
So we are anticipating that we would want to do more measurements out there, as well as identify the incidences of noise issues out there. We would anticipate that could take anywhere roughly in the 6-month time frame to be able to do the full analysis and be able to come back to the city council with that. Obviously, if conditions deteriorate significantly out there in the intervening time, we will advise the council of that. But we do think that it's appropriate to gather significant data and then be able to narrowly tailor the restriction in a way that is consistent with the relevant case law.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions for Mr. Mattis? Okay, then we're done with the consent calendar, and we're moving on to public communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comments on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the council cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the items to staff. Consistent with Section 9.5 of the City Council Handbook, 30 minutes will be allocated at this time for public communications for items not on the agenda. Additional time for public communications for items not on the agenda will be provided at the end of the meeting if necessary. So I'd invite any members of the public who'd like to make public comments at this time. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature or press *9. And for those who are in the chamber, please line up as Ms. Warren is demonstrating at the lectern or along the side wall. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their oral remarks. Written comments submitted have been posted to the city's website for public review, are included in the meeting record, but will not be separately read into the record. At this time, I will note the time is 6:54. And we will take public comments until 7:24 on items not on the agenda, and then the remainder of any such comments at the end of the open session portion of the meeting. Please note that in-person comments will be accepted prior to remote comments. And Ms. Warren, you have the floor. Welcome. Again.
Thank you. Jan Warren from Rose Lane, Walnut Creek. I was here a month ago when we discussed the housing element, and this is the spring 2022 nutshell that came out. And unlike Mr. Wilk, there was not a lot of graphics. There was a lot of words, and at the very bottom, walnutcreek-org/HEU. And I went to the website for weeks and weeks, and well, you know, it just went up. You know, they just made the changes, and the changes that Mr. Smith thought were going to be made, that were going to be graphic and nice and catch somebody's eye, still aren't there. But I'm bringing it up because I got my email today about the March 22nd Housing Element Workshop. And I want to invite anyone listening to show up and participate and give input, because you won't have too many opportunities. And unfortunately, our calendars are full and more notice would be helpful. So that's the basic, the only thing I'm going to ask the mayor is, when you do your video, give a plug for the housing element, okay? Thank you.
I will, thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Sue, and I'm a local volunteer for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I'm the local co-lead for the Greater Mount Diablo region here. And I actually am a resident of Danville, but a very frequent visitor to Walnut Creek. I'm speaking tonight in support of a safe firearm ordinance to potentially be added to a future city council agenda. The goal of this effort is to remind Walnut Creek residents that the simple act of responsibly storing their firearm can prevent the injury or death of family, friends, and fellow Walnut Creek residents. Keeping guns out of the hands of people who are likely to harm themselves or others before they act is the most effective way to prevent gun violence. Some of our volunteers are sharing information on will share information on unintentional shootings, but unsecured firearms can also get in the hands of dangerous criminals. Gun thefts occur in staggering numbers. Hundreds of thousands of guns are stolen every year, taken from houses, vehicles, and stores. Gun thefts often divert guns into an underground market where people with dangerous histories are easily able to obtain firearms without restriction. That is why stolen guns are often recovered at crime scenes, including at the scenes of homicides and other violent crimes. In fact, estimates suggest that between 200,000 and 500,000 guns are stolen from individuals each year. The most recent nationally representative survey found that approximately 380,000 guns are stolen from private gun owners every year. And these numbers are on the rise, with the 60% increase in the number of guns reported stolen from individuals between 2006 and 2016. Stolen guns undermine the enforcement of our gun laws and often end up in the possession of someone who is legally prohibited from having guns. And the majority of the stolen firearms recovered by police between 2010 and 2016 were recovered in connection with crimes, including more than 1,500 violent acts.
And that's it, Ms. Sue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Mora. I'm a over 30-year resident of Walnut Creek. A mom. I've been active in swim team, PTAs, various organizations. And now, as a concerned citizen and mom, I'm getting involved in a Mom's Demand. And I urge you to consider adding a safe firearms storage ordinance to future city council agenda. I had 2 daughters go through the Walnut Creek school system, and in the 8 years that I had one or the other at Los Lomas, there were multiple lockdowns from various gun threats. In one instance, a kid did have a gun in a backpack, and the general knowledge amongst the kids who knew that student was that the gun had been stolen from the home of a neighbor. There was also the incident where the kid got shot at Homestead in Ignacio a few years ago. He was a friend of my daughter, and she was texting him in his hospital bed where he just got shot. So even though we like to think these things don't happen in Walnut Creek, they do. The fact is that we're simply all safer when guns are stored, unloaded, locked, and separate from ammunition. One study found that households that locked both firearms and ammunition were associated with a 78% lower risk of self-inflicted firearm injuries and an 85% lower risk of unintentional firearm injuries among children and teens, compared to those that locked neither. Another estimated that if half of households with children that have at least one unlocked gun switched to locking all their guns, 1/3 of youth gun suicides and unintentional deaths could be prevented, saving an estimated 251 lives in a single year. This is a simple preventative act that Walnut Creek can take to try to avoid our city becoming part of the devastating firearm statistics. I recently read that Pleasanton passed such a ordinance, and I was surprised to find out that Walnut Creek did not have such an ordinance. So please consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mora. Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Erin Roeder. I'm a resident of Walnut Creek. I've been an active parent volunteer in my children's schools since kindergarten. They're now juniors at Northgate High School. I was an instructional assistant for the Mount Diablo Unified School District for over 5 years. I'm currently a substitute teacher in the district, and as a parent and a school district employee, gun violence on school campuses is always on my mind. That is why I'm speaking tonight in support of a safe firearm ordinance being added to a future City Council agenda. School shootings, while rare, have sadly become more and more common. In 2021, there were at least 202 incidents of gunfire on school grounds, resulting in 49 deaths and 126 injuries nationally. So far, just in 2022, there have been at least 15 school shootings. How much longer can Walnut Creek stay safe? The majority of people who discharge a gun on school grounds were either current or former students, staff, faculty, or resource officers. Similarly, an analysis of New York City Police Department's review of active shooter incidents in K-12 schools found that 75% of these incidents, the shooter or shooters were school age and were current or former students. When the school shooter is school age, 80% of the time, the guns used by these children usually come from their own home or a relative or a friend. Guns need to be stored safely. Simple efforts like the Safe Storage Ordinance can help remind Walnut Creek residents that you care about your community, and a big part of keeping the residents safe and our kids on campuses safe is to ensure our residents safely store their firearms. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roeder. Next speaker.
If you notice, I'm walking a little better, but nothing's going to ever. I take 3 strides, by the way, Pete Bennett again. I take 3 strides after being attacked in the library. It wasn't a gun. It was an arm over my throat where I blacked out and I was choking to death. Nearly lost my life. Now that falls under statute 2403 of the federal code, force, fear, or violence. A year before that, a library guard broke my ribs. That took 6 or 7 months. Before that, a guy threw me through the window on Locust Street. And before that, a guy beat me up in the middle of the street on Locust. And 15 years ago, a building inspector from the town of Danville, he dislocated my shoulders. I'm 5'8", 160, fighting a guy 300 pounds. I did pretty good. So, yeah, I know guns because I had a computer store here in Walnut Creek in the early 90s. A guy showed up with a gun. I shut my business down because 5 years earlier, I was in a gun battle in my cabinet shop. And that was around the time they killed my witness in Bennett versus Southern Pacific in 1989 or 90. And then I took that to City Attorney Mark Kuhn in 2008. I think I sent you guys a picture of the email. And then Mark was killed. And I came forward in the murder of a police officer that links back to another murder back in the 80s in Pittsburgh. Officer Lester Garnier shot dead in the Walnut Creek parking lot in 1988. Your officers in this department came down and my life. Every office I've had in this town, they've showed up. Stole my passbooks, my computers, copied my systems, cloned my drives, destroyed my businesses. Here I am. Oh, by the way, last year they killed my attorney, or the year before. No big deal.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Next speaker.
Good evening, Mayor Francois, City Council. My name is Cian Sanchez. I'm with Torsop Thai Kitchen at 1388 Locust Street. First, would like to say thank you for, looks like we're on the other side of COVID. Hopefully we stay here for a while. The Rebound program really helped us as a restaurant operator. We really appreciate all the thought and work that went into letting us operate out in front of the building, and it came through relatively quickly once we started to shut down in March. To be able to open back up again within a year was a blessing. So I know more information is coming out for June. We can go through June. There's going to be more on building out permanently in the parking structures, in the parking spots. We would love to do that. We're saved some funds to do that. The last time around, you allowed us to build, and then you also came with an additional kind of template that all the restaurants could use. We didn't go that route, a cover template. When it comes out again, we would like to be something unique, to have a few options and not just one template that all the restaurants could use. We are a unique business. We've got unique food. So something that's safe for the city, safe for the drivers, safe for our customers, but allowed to add something of our flavor onto it. So we look forward to that. Really just wanted to show up tonight and say it was important to us. I know the other restaurateurs, it was very important, and we look forward to continuing it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight, sir. So the next on the agenda will be the Downtown Next study session where we will discuss outdoor dining and changes to policies, and so we'd invite public comment on that when we get to that item. But first, we're on public communication still for items not on the agenda, and I'll turn to Zoom if there are any speakers on Zoom that would like to address us.
We're about 7 speakers. We'll go ahead and bring in Annie Wright.
Good evening, Ms. Wright. Are you unmuted?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Welcome.
Hello, good evening. I'm Annie Wright. I'm a longtime Contra Costa County resident, a lifelong animal lover and rescue volunteer for over 20 years. I've helped control the overpopulation of homeless community cats by trapping and getting them fixed, vaccinated, fostering adoptable kittens and cats. Rescue people like me rely heavily on nonprofit rescues to help with vetting adoptions. We are the safety net for Contra Costa Animal Services. So I'm very concerned about animal welfare and the new service agreement Animal Services sent to the 18 incorporated cities. The scope doesn't outline vital services, leaving cities vulnerable and responsible for the services. The shelter has reduced many community-based programs such as low-cost spay and neuter, vaccinations, and free TNR, which is the trap, neuter, and return for community cats. The wait lists for all of these programs are so long, they're between 2 and 3 months. So they're the overpopulation of both owned pets, community cats, dogs, it is a crisis situation. I'm asking you to please negotiate the services with our county, provide the vital services that our community needs. We're tax-paying citizens here. We've run out of resources here for the nonprofit groups. We've been doing this for years now with paying out of our own pocket, our own time. And this was even before COVID. Animal Services closed down a lot of programs. And then now they've had really limited programs that are community-based. And there's such a long wait list. So this is very serious. The other issue is that they stopped providing wildlife services for injured animals.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wright. And just a reminder for those joining us by Zoom, the Zoom feed will automatically cut off at the 2-minute mark. So you might want to keep an eye on the clock while you're making your remarks. And next speaker.
Next speaker is Ivana L.
Thank you, Walnut Creek City Council and staff, for taking my phone call tonight. My name is Ivana Lobos, and I'm a tax-paying citizen in Contra Costa County. I'm speaking tonight about a rise in canine distemper, an often fatal viral disease that is highly contagious among some mammals. Additionally, it appears to be spreading at a very high rate within our wildlife population, which in turn threatens our domestic dog population. As a dog guardian myself, my dogs receive their distemper, parainfluenza, parvovirus, and rabies vaccines when scheduled to protect them and the other dogs they interact with. However, not everyone has the transportation or financial means to keep current with their pets' medical appointments, much less their own. Canine distemper can be prevented or greatly reduced with a simple vaccine, and every vet I speak to says, please make sure your pets are up to date on these shots. Until recently, Contra Costa Animal Services has closed its low-cost public spay and neuter and vaccine clinics, putting the full brunt of these services on the very few nonprofit rescue groups or the average citizen like myself. These taxpayer-funded services have since reopened, but for only 4 owned animals per day on select days of the week. The wait list for these services is at least 3 months long. In the meantime, it seems that Contra Costa Animal Services has been planning for each city in Contra Costa County to pay extra in per capita city fees to offset the cost of the taxpayer-funded services that they are required to provide, but have not been doing. I asked City Council not to sign any contract provided by Contra Costa Animal Services until they're able to meet the needs of the tax-paying citizens with the allotted time and money for these services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Laurel Dobbin.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Good. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Laurel Dobbin. I've been a resident of Walnut Creek for 10 years. I'm speaking tonight, as others in the chambers have spoken tonight, in support of adding a safe firearm ordinance to a future City Council agenda. The goal of this effort is to remind Walnut Creek residents that the simple act of responsibly storing firearms can prevent the injury or death of family, friends, and fellow Walnut Creek residents. Gun violence has a devastating impact on children in America. In fact, 40% of child gun deaths are suicides. That's nearly 700 child gun suicides each year. One study showed that over 80% of children under the age of 18 who died by gun suicide used a gun belonging to a parent or relative. For people of all ages, access to a gun increases the risk of death by suicide by 3 times. Most people who attempt suicide do not die unless they use a gun. 90% of suicide attempts with a gun result in death, a much higher fatality rate than any other means of self-harm. This contributes to the fact that 40% of child suicides involve a gun. A national survey of high school students found that 17% had seriously considered attempting suicide within the last year. And one study showed that 41% of adolescents in gun-owning households report having easy access to guns in their home. Please help to keep Walnut Creek residents out of these devastating statistics. Walnut Creek should join our neighbors, including Antioch, Pleasanton, Dublin, Orinda, and Moraga, in considering and passing a safe firearm storage ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dobbin. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Katie Brown Davis.
Good evening. I'm Katie Brown Davis, and I have been a Walnut Creek resident for over 10 years. I'm speaking tonight as a concerned citizen, a volunteer with Moms Demand Action, and a mother of 2 elementary school aged children, and as a wife of a local high school teacher and coach within the community. I urge you to consider adding safe firearm storage ordinance to a future City Council agenda. Secure firearm storage is an essential part of home safety. With more guns in more homes due to an unprecedented surge in gun sales over the past 2 years, it's more important than ever for parents and caregivers to know how secure storage protects children. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a rise in unintentional shootings by children and gunfire on school grounds. And in 2020, gun suicide among children ages 17 and under reached the highest rate in more than 20 years, and firearms became the leading cause of death among children in the United States. We can do better. Storing firearms securely can help prevent these tragedies and keep our kids safe. This ordinance has nothing to do with background checks or making it harder to obtain a gun. It has absolutely everything to do with keeping guns away from children and teens who should not be handling or playing with firearms. I'd like to see Walnut Creek act before a real tragedy hits our community. Thoughts and prayers are not enough, and efforts like this ordinance are a small and local step that is important to move us in the right direction. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Brown Davis. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Anna Jurgens.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Is my audio coming through okay?
It is. Good evening.
Well, wonderful, thank you. My name is Anna Jurgens. My husband and I have lived in Walnut Creek for 12 years and raised our children here. I'm also speaking in support of a safe firearm storage ordinance for Walnut Creek. A study from just last fall from a program at UC Davis revealed that nearly 2/3 of people in California who have guns and live with children do not store their guns locked up or and unloaded. This is incredibly important because an estimated 1 in 5 California households with children, approximately 931,000, contain at least one firearm. This proposed ordinance should be added to a future agenda for Walnut Creek, as passage would be easy and it'll help protect our children. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Jurgens. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Ann Ling.
Good evening, Ms. Ling. Are you back on with us?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry about that. I'm speaking as a concerned citizen of Contra Costa County, and thank you for allowing me to speak again tonight. Contra Costa Animal Services drafted the City-County Animal Services Agreement, which has been sent to all the cities, as the other callers have noted. This agreement is written below the basic standard of care by shelters across the state, many of them serving much smaller populations with a fraction of the animal services budget. I am requesting the 18 cities to agree to the increased funding that animal services needs that they had proposed. However, along with the additional funding, a well-written, humane city-county agreement is required, outlining actual services that they should be providing. This agreement should consider all the 18 different cities, along with rescue groups. Community members need to be involved in creating this new revised agreement. In September 2020, Animal Services removed many of the services, quoting because due to budget restrictions. Some of these included field services decreased from 16 to 10. Field services reduced their operating hours. The on-call coverage was reduced. They stopped all wildlife calls and they referred them to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. However, they are unable to take these calls due to having only 4 officers for 4 counties. I've experienced myself deer on the side of the road for over 12 hours due to being hit by a car. Citizens are desperately trying to assist them. They're calling animal services, they're calling the cities, they're calling the Sheriff's Department, they're calling California Department of Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife. No one is responding, and you're stuck trying to assist this animal. I am asking that if this additional funding.
Thank you, Ms. Ling. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Barbara Gordon.
I think it's Barbara Guinness.
Thank you, Barbara Guinness.
Welcome, Ms. Guinness. Good evening, Ms. Guinness. Are you with us and unmuted?
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can. welcome.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. My name is Barbara Guinness, and I've been a resident of Walnut Creek since 1996. I was looking at the open space rules and regulations on the Walnut Creek website earlier today, and I saw a Safe Trails initiative is going on, and I can't really tell when did this start or what's the time frame of it. So that was a question I had. It said to contact staff, so I was wondering who I should contact on that too, if it's Public Works or who is it? And also it talks about that the initiative is concerned about safety on the trails. And I'm wondering, they talk about multi-use trails, but I'm wondering if it will cover the single track trails that are supposed to be for hikers and equestrians only. But as probably most of you know, there's a whole bunch of mountain bike traffic on it, which really creates a safety issue. So I'm wondering if they're looking at that too. And then the last thing that I wanted to ask, and maybe if this goes to a staff person, is if I had a situation out there today on the trails, and I'm wondering if, if a person's hurt, what is the liability to the city of Walnut Creek? Or is there any liability? I see close calls and I've been in some myself. I'm just curious on maybe where I can read about that or if there's someone that can talk to me about it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Guinness. We'll try to get some answers to your questions. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Cassidy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. You're
Oh,
on.
good.
Hi.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Thank you so much. So confusing. My name is Cassidy Schulman. I'm here to speak on behalf of In Defense of Animals, an international animal welfare nonprofit with more than 250,000 supporters, many of whom live in the Bay Area where we are headquartered. I moved to the East Bay in 1996, and I started volunteering at Lindsay Wildlife that same year. Some days were heartbreaking, but one of the best things about working the intake desk was interacting with hundreds of caring individuals. Countless Good Samaritans came in carrying mystery boxes full of baby raccoons found crying by the side of the road, or little squirrels whose nests had come down in high winds. Children arrived cradling tiny hummingbird nests in their hands. People traveled from all over the county and beyond, arriving with eyes full of hope that a life that was precious to them could be saved. Our most frequent rescuers were animal control officers. The people of Contra Costa County depended on these officers and were grateful for the services they provided. In September 2020, Contra Costa Animal Services eliminated all services for live wildlife calls, stating that they needed more money from their city partners. The proposed contract would grant them considerably more money, and yet it does not reinstate these much-needed animal control officer positions. The Board of Supervisors now states that they have no intent of providing these services and that California Fish and Wildlife Services alone should do so. Contra Costa County's Animal Services refusal to care for gravely injured animals sends a message to our community that individual lives are worthless and that wild animals are disposable. It demonstrates to our children that nobody cares when animals suffer. I think back on all the people who were so grateful that there was a place to bring injured and orphaned wildlife, and it breaks my heart. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for calling in this evening. And that's all the time we have at this point for public communications, and that's all the public communication comments we have. So we will close public communications and bring it back to the council for clarifying questions for staff. I had identified 3 items: the animal control ordinance, safe trails, and the safe firearm ordinance. And I'll turn to our city manager maybe to provide direction on the first 2 and any information he can on the third, although I think that's more for the council to discuss.
Yeah, good evening. Dan Buckshire, City Manager. Regarding the open space and trails, the contact for Ms. Guinness would be Mike Vickers of Public Works, who's been the point person on this. And then also I would just note that is currently planned that the report that the Trails Committee has been working on, there'll be an update provided on the April 4th Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission. So I'd direct anybody who's interested in that topic to attend that particular commission for an update. With respect to animal services, city staff is well aware of this. Actually, the Animal Services Department at the county approached the city managers group, the PMA, a couple years ago to address the contract and to address considerable staffing concerns as well as the overall costs that were being charged. Effectively, they believe they were not charging as much as needed to cover the cost for the existing services, and also wanted to look at increasing service levels based upon feedback from the community and from many of the cities as well. That said, just to clarify a couple points, is that the county is responsible for providing animal services within the unincorporated area. They do not have to provide those services within the city limits. It is a contract arrangement, hence the reason we're looking at an updated contract. Without going into too much detail, the costs are slated to go up considerably over a 2-year period, almost 30% in terms of the charges to cities over that time frame. And at the same time, they are adding a considerable number of staff in order to improve the actual level of service that has been occurring over the last few years. That said, we are having discussions with the county on an ongoing basis, and we'll look into some of these comments further as we discuss with the county team.
Okay, then I'll turn to my colleagues if there was any item that I missed or for any feedback you have on the safe firearm storage ordinance and placing that on a future agenda. Councilmember Wilk.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate all the speakers on all the different topics tonight. I did have a question about the gun storage ordinance. I recall there being a state law or something that was going to be passing through the state regarding safe storage of guns. Is the city attorney or anybody able to give us an update to that?
We can look into that and report back. I do think that we have, I know that we've reviewed the safe storage issue previously, and we can provide the council an update on both the status of the state law and options available to the council if the council so desires.
Great, thank you. And I'd heard from a couple of speakers, one in particular listed about 5 cities. I got down Pleasanton, Orinda, Antioch, Dublin, and Moraga that have all passed safe storage law ordinances. Was there any other cities, or do you know if those cities are accurate too?
The public comment part is closed. I believe most of the big cities have, and the city of Mountain View just did recently.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did recall that as well. And the only other comment I'd make to that is that we did have a PSA last year that I provided comments as well as Chief Knox on for safe storage of guns. And this is something that we're seeing a lot more, and it does seem to have a definite impact on saving people's lives. I would be supportive if somebody were to make a motion, and I'm happy to make that motion once everybody has their comments, but I'd be supportive in having this come and be on an agenda and hearing a staff report on this.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wilk. I'll turn to my colleagues in the chamber. Councilmember Darling.
Thank you. I appreciate the issues that have been brought before us. I think I would be interested in hearing a report from staff on the status of the current state law and what the other options are and what other cities have done. I also recognize that our staff are struggling right now with our current 5 priorities, but I think this fits in there within them, and we would have to work it in with their other workload, but I'd be interested.
And Councilmember Haskew.
I'd like to know what the other ordinances say, because, the concept makes sense to me, but pretty much I've already declared, I don't even touch guns, so that I am not the person that you should ask about good gun courtesy and things like that. And I've got stories to tell about my son and a neighbor coming home and apologizing because her son pointed a gun at my son. It strained our relationship pretty severely. I don't understand how it's administered because I don't know how you can enforce it. It's trust, and I don't know that having an ordinance is any better than having public service announcements reminding people how successful it is to protect people around who have guns to do what you are suggesting. Lock up the gun, lock up the ammunition, and keep them separate until you need them. I'm for the concept, I just don't know how it works in the day-to-day.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Thank you very much for all of the people who spoke this evening on issues. We've had the conversation about the safe guns and the storage before, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was interesting because it was the same question that Councilmember Haskew just raised, which is how do you, you used administer, I would use enforce, and ensure that people do the right thing, that a public education campaign is really what is going to be required even if we have an ordinance, because you have to continue to promote the safety. So I would, if we are going to have staff bring us information on this, I'd like to hear from the police department as to what the effectiveness of an ordinance is versus what would be the best way to ensure the safety of the guns that are in the home.
I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate all the comments tonight in person and over Zoom. I'm interested in having a report come back from staff with what state law covers, what it doesn't cover, what other cities are doing, what our options are, how it's enforced. I did have the opportunity to read the Mountain View ordinance, and think it provides a pretty good overview of a lot of those issues if staff is looking for a recent example. So I would move that we add that item to a future agenda.
I'd second that.
Okay, and Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Mayor Francois,
Aye.
Councilmember Darling,
Aye.
Councilmember Haskew,
Aye.
Councilmember Wilk,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Apologies, I lost my script. Okay, so that concludes public communications. And before we do that, though, I'll turn to the staff. And do we have not imposing a deadline on you, but just a realistic time frame on when that report might come back to the council?
I think realistically, given some of the other priorities, we're looking at mid to late summer.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on then to, we're done with public communications. The next item on the agenda is council member and staff announcements, reports on activities or requests, closed session announcements. Mr. Mattis.
Thank you, Mayor. The council did meet in closed session today. There was no reportable action out of closed session. And Mayor, I would just add one of the public comments asked a question about liability associated with trails in the open space. And I would just direct that person to Government Code Section 831.4. There is an immunity for public agencies associated with public trails.
Excellent, thank you. City Manager reports, Mr. Buckshire.
Yeah, good evening, Dan Buckshire, City Manager. I want to provide a brief update on the A3 program, the Anyone, Anywhere, Anytime mental health crisis response program that Walnut Creek has been helping lead with the other 18 cities and Contra Costa County. As your council will recall, in a prior update, we announced that the county allocated $20 million annually of Measure X funds to support this program, as well as $5 million of one-time funding to support this program. And I wanted to provide another update as to the status of the allocation of those funds and the scaling up of this program. So for the $5 million of one-time, about $1.25 million is being allocated for the call center, for the technology, more specifically related to how calls coming into 988 or to 911 will be triaged and dispatched in coordination with all of the law enforcement agencies in the city and through this dedicated call center. Additional about $3.25 million will be allocated to the capital expansion and update for what will be, it's a facility in Concord for what will be the Miles Hall Community Crisis Hub, which will house not only the call center, but will be a walk-in option for those that are experiencing a crisis as well. And then there's about $400,000 for training. As for the $20 million of ongoing, the county recently authorized the hiring of a significant number of employees for this program. As you'll recall, the current number of mobile crisis response teams for adults in the county is 2 to serve all of Contra Costa County, and with this program, it will be expanded to 34 teams, which will pair a mental health crisis, either technician or clinician, with an emergency medical technician, paramedic effectively, and then potentially law enforcement if the situation deems necessary. As far as authorizing the hiring of positions, looking at immediately they're recruiting for 34 positions to help get these going. And as of July and August, they will be recruiting for an additional 39 positions. Now, obviously, we know the labor market is tight, and we know this will take a while. However, the full recruitment and eventual hiring of these 73 positions is now underway. So it's a huge milestone, really exciting to see that happen. With respect to the call center, you know, we've been testing the call center in terms of how it integrates with all of the dispatch centers and all of the law enforcement agencies throughout the county. The call center is open Monday to Friday from 8 o'clock to 6:30 each day, and we're targeting having 24/7 operations at the call center by the end of this calendar year. And then lastly, much of the work in coordination with that expansion is the overall dispatch process is being diagnosed and obviously, or designed rather, and being coordinated with all of law enforcement. And there'll be a lot of training to occur for how to route these various calls. So considerable efforts underway on that program, which is great to see.
Great report, thank you. Let's turn to my colleagues in the chamber for council member reports. Councilmember Darling.
Thank you, and it's been a couple busy weeks. The Homeless Task Force met right after our last council meeting, and we heard from a woman back in Boulder at an innovative program. She was actually homeless herself and lost her foot to frostbite, and that kind of brought home to her how important it was to get her act together. She got back to school and started a program working with the folks that were still on the street, and it was a really heartwarming story to hear and a lot of good lessons for us here in Walnut Creek. At the other end of the Homeless Task Force, the core team that has been funded by this council for the year and the HOP team have been working on one particular individual here in town who's been here a long time and needed to get into substance treatment, and they were celebrating that she had gotten in, and they were working to keep her there so that she could get the help she needed. Got to go to the employee appreciation lunch with many of my fellow council members, and that was quite fun, and good tacos. The Youth Leadership Commission, I got to meet with them, and it's a food theme. They asked me what my favorite breakfast is. I had to admit I'm an old person and I like oatmeal. I got to go to the symphony lunch and see Luella Haskew model in front of everybody else, along with all my other fellow council members. Went out with the cleanup crew, picked up garbage, and the MCE Executive Committee is in the process of finalizing their budget for the year. And one of the things that we've asked them to include in that is the CARES program, which is helping people with their electricity bills. We started that during the pandemic. It's a credit for people a lower income to help them. And it's going to be every bit as important as energy costs continue to increase. And I managed to do a housing presentation. This is the start of the housing element rollout. And I got to do a presentation the other night to a couple local folks, and most importantly, I went to the farmer's market the other day, and Brian Hirahar and I saved the world when the pop-up was, the wind caught it and started flying through and Brian and I grabbed it, and he helped me get it back down to the ground, and we answered everybody's questions in the meantime. So that's my report.
Well done, thank you for the heroes. Councilmember Haskew.
That's a tough one to follow. I was at the mayor's conference, and I honestly don't remember what the topic was. It didn't razzle dazzle me. Does anybody help me out?
Okay, I'll give
East
that
Bay
part of the
Parks.
update now. East Bay Regional Parks District.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. That fascinated I was. I also attended the California Association of Counties of Government, CalCog for short, for Pete's sakes, and they canceled the board meeting, but they substituted the legislative committee, and I sat in rapt attention as they analyzed potential positions on legislation in the government, state government. I am now chair of TransPAC, and we talked a lot about a topic that I'm going to say second. The first one was we heard about we have a responsibility at TransPAC to allocate the funds that we raise under sales tax for transportation for seniors and disabled people. And we have, unfortunately, less money than we have groups asking for money. We're about 25% short of the request for grants. But we did get to hear from the County Connection bus system, George Miller Senior Transportation in Concord, and the Center for Elder Independence, who came and explained their programs to us. And so we know more about things that we just didn't do. The main part of the meeting was about the Central County Action Plan that is, and for Pete's sakes, I left it home. The Central, no, maybe I didn't. I am so sorry. Here it is in my hand. And it's where we're evaluating countywide our roads of regional significance, and now we're adding bike plan of regional significance and ped plans. And sadly, the one open house where they're seeking public comment was held today at between 4 and 6 at the BART station. But they are going to be doing several virtual workshops, and they are going to have other ones throughout the county. So I really encourage people to go on the website if they can't make it to any of the virtuals or the live solicitation of your opinions. The website is ccta.net/planning/county-wide-transportation-plan/ and give your opinion about what you think is important. This is critical because this is how our county is going to plan future transportation. And we'd like to hear about people who are interested in doing something besides getting in their cars and driving by themselves, as much fun as that is. And coming up, there will be a groundbreaking for the McCollum Trail Bike Ped Crossing, and that will be at 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday at Brentwood. And my meeting tomorrow night at Contra Costa Transportation Authority, we will vote to request Measure X funding if the mental health program didn't use up all the funding to get accessible transportation for getting people, seniors, veterans, and the disabled point to point without making them get on and off buses and other means of transportation. So that's it.
Thank you. Just to staff, if we haven't already, if there's an opportunity to notice the public comment period on the plan with the website link that Councilmember Haskew pointed out, if we can get that on our website, I think that might be helpful.
I already sent the information.
Wonderful. Okay, and we'll turn to Councilmember Wilk next.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the last couple of weeks have been heavy in the County Connection and Central Contra Costa Transit Authority. And I'm in Washington, D.C. on that particular topic right now. So I have meetings with our legislatures for National Public Transit Conference, which is APTA. And even with the war going on, and even with Ukrainian President Zelensky speaking tomorrow morning, we were able to get some time with some of the Senate team as well as some congressmen today. And we wanted to be able to provide to ensure that we're continuing to get this needed transit money and to be able to keep our transportation business going. A lot of people actually may not realize that over the past year and during the height of COVID, County Connection retooled itself. Our ridership was way down, as can be imagined, but we were able to retool it so that we provided a service for people that were disabled and elderly, and being able to provide them food, much like a Meals on Wheels, because a lot of the people that deliver Meals on Wheels typically are elder people, and they were home, they weren't delivering. So we're able to retool our bus drivers and our buses for that. We also were able to use the buses to transport people that had COVID, or that had to go, that had to go to the hospital, and be able to provide it in a COVID-free environment, a COVID-safe environment. And we were able to have our school buses deliver school lunches to families who requested it for their students. So all of this happened. It wasn't publicized a lot outside of the people that typically were really in need of these services, but it just showed what we can still do even if people weren't riding the buses. One of the things that we are looking at for getting some of this funding is moving the buses eventually, and we're talking about several years down the line here, is moving them to green hydrogen cells. Currently, we're really proud to have the only 2 lines that are electric buses in the entire system, and that's our routes 4 and 5. But there is a limitation with the range when it comes to electric buses, and this is throughout the entire country. And so green hydrogen cells will provide the range, the ability to recharge faster and cheaper. And so we're going to start seeing a lot of the bus systems in the country moving toward that for clean energy. So this is all part of the funding that we're asking for to keep public transportation going while we still are trying to recover from the ridership losses that happened during COVID. That's my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilk. Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Like Councilmember Wilk, I am in Washington, D.C., but I am at the annual conference of the National League of Cities. It's the Congressional City Conference. This is where we come together to address federal-related issues for cities around the country and advocate on the Hill with senators, legislators, and then also from representatives of various federal departments. This year's conference is actually focused significantly on the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the $1.2 trillion in funding that will be coming to us over the course of the next 5 years. About $50 billion of the $1.2 trillion is expected to come to the state of California, our cities, not just the state. The state gets significantly more as well. We had a number of sessions in particular talking about transportation issues and transportation funding from the Federal Highway Administration, as well as from a very well-kept secret called the Build America Bureau, which is a $100 billion bank inside the Department of Transportation. And we got a complete list of what we can build and what we're eligible to borrow from that. So there will be more information coming out about the results of this week's meetings. It included a presentation by the president yesterday to the group. And we also today heard from the mayor of Lviv in Western Ukraine about the challenges of being a mayor while being under attack. And so that was interesting and sad at the same time. And I think I can leave that there. It's the most interesting thing that I've been doing.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, our hearts go out to the people of Ukraine, and I hope that that conflict resolves itself in a peaceful manner as quickly as possible, as we all do. On behalf of all of you, I attended the mayor's conference earlier this month. We had a presentation from a representative from the East Bay Regional Parks District, who Sabrina Landreth, who has a background with in city manager's office and now is director of East Bay Regional Parks. So she's a friend to cities and understands the issues we deal with, and also has they have the remarkable good fortune of overseeing a tremendous amount of open space land in the East Bay that we all benefit from, that complements the city's own expansive open space holdings. So we're glad to hear a presentation from her, and heard Other updates, we're still meeting by Zoom, but I think the hope is that at some point in the near future, we'll resume in-person meetings along with all of my colleagues. I attended the fundraiser for the California Symphony and was really impressed with the turnout and the amount of money that Councilmember Haskew and her board members raised for Cal Symphony. And I think they're off to a great season and start, and look forward to wish them a lot of success. Serve on the Recycle Smart board with Mayor Pro Tem Silva, and I'm on the Personnel Committee. We met and voted to approve or make a recommendation to the Finance Committee, on which Mayor Pro Tem Silva sits, for a COLA increase for our employees at Recycle Smart. Along with Councilmember Wilk, I serve on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. We met last week and finalized some of the questions that will be going out in a community survey dealing with various issues related to community engagement, economic development, police, governments, and we had a frank and good discussion about those questions, and then provided input on communications and partnerships. And I believe that would be it for my report today. And so we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Lost my script again, sorry. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, it's way down the agenda, is a consideration item, Downtown Next Study Session 2. At this time, I'd invite staff to provide the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Francois and council members. Terry Kilgore, Assistant City Manager, and I'm joined this evening by Colette Hanna, our Economic Development Manager. We also have several key staff members on the line, should we have additional questions that need some technical insights. This evening, we are continuing our discussion around Downtown Next, which is our dialogue around how we transition from temporary outdoor dining that was established on a temporary basis during the pandemic into a more permanent outdoor dining solution that balances the needs of the restaurants with those of retailers, salons, office, and residential tenants of the downtown. Tonight, we'll be talking a little bit about what we've already decided, just to recap for those who might be joining the discussion midstream. We'll be talking about some additional policy discussions and decisions where we need direction from the council. These are really foundational items that we will be building upon as we look towards building a comprehensive outdoor dining policy. We will reserve plenty of time at the end for questions. We've tried to summarize our presentation as briefly as we can. Next slide, please. Oh. So this evening, we are on a journey, as I mentioned. We're about halfway through. We have already decided, and Colette will walk you through these in more detail. We've already made some key decisions, but there are some more policy distinctions ahead. One of the rumors I'd like to put to bed is that the Rebound program is definitively ending June 30th. As we've done throughout the program, we have extended the temporary outdoor dining pop-ups that are out there on the streets now until we are ready with our next steps and our next clear policy and implementation guidelines. So we will be returning to council in the next month or so to talk about how far out to extend this. And we've got some complicating factors that Colette will also walk you through. So we will be continuing on here. Next slide. This evening, we are focusing on what we are calling pods. We have been struggling with names. Some people call them parklets and pop-ups and all kinds of different names. And so we are labeling them pods, and these are specifically in the graphic on the screen, those dining structures that are on the street, and these are intended to be permanent outdoor dining structures, hence the cute little acronym. So trying to get ourselves focused on these. While it feels like perhaps a subtle nuance to everyone else, it comes with some different standards because it's actually in the street. So we have some additional process we need to go through. So these are distinguished from those patios that are either privately owned or sitting on other types of city-owned property. And then again, separate from those sidewalk dining locations that are already established in the downtown. The goal at the end of this journey is to have all 4 of those types of locations addressed in a single policy, so that when a restaurant wants to kind of move into outdoor dining, say they're new to downtown, it's a clear roadmap for how to do that regardless of where and what kind of conditions they inherited. So tonight we are focusing just on type 4, the pods. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Colette to walk us through the specific recommendations.
All righty, thanks, Terry. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Colette Hanna, Economic Development Manager. And so I wanted to start off with just kind of talking about how we started this process. An ad hoc obviously was formed when we launched Rebound, and we've been meeting with them on a regular basis and even more often as we've started this discussion on how to integrate permanent structures per council's direction at our last meeting. So we've been meeting with the ad hoc, but we also, when we launched Rebound, met regularly with Walnut Creek Downtown. And so we're continuing that process and getting their input and their feedback as we start looking at, again, how to introduce this new concept in terms of outdoor dining in the downtown area. The other thing that we've done and that we'll continue to do is gather business and community input with the survey that we did last spring, the direct business outreach that we did, focus groups, and we're continuing to receive input, and we'll continue to gather and conduct outreach in order to get the feedback that we need in order to continue this program. So just to recap briefly, the direction that was received at our study session earlier this year, we did receive input and direction from council to pursue development of design standards for outdoor dining structures with no at-grade spaces, which is what they are now through Rebound. We also received direction to provide design options and standards for those with a roof, as well as an option for without a roof, but that the standard going forward would be for a structure of some sort, as opposed to the at-grade spaces that we see currently. In terms of traffic circulation, direction was to keep circulation in its current pattern and not to pursue any further study on one-way streets and full street closures. So that is just to quickly recap what we had received before, and that was basically the path that we followed in looking at these going forward. Some of what we also did, and just kind of framing this, is how these recommendations that we'll look at tonight fall into some larger kind of categories that impact and that will fold into this outdoor dining program. So these are elements that as Terry mentioned, that will be kind of the basis and the foundational elements that we'll be discussing tonight. So obviously looking at design standards for structures, how do we manage the outdoor dining in private parking lots as they are currently, how do we fairly allocate public space, what the permitting and approvals would be like, and how do we establish and what should that establishment of a fee structure look like. So what I'll do is just go through these really quickly of the recommendations that were outlined in the staff report, and then we'll go through these in detail as well as closing with any questions and discussion that you want to pursue at that time. So the recommendations that were presented, and I should also note that these were, we received consensus from the ad hoc as well as WCD on all of these recommendations, hence the recommendations that we're bringing to you tonight, except for one item, which I will note as we continue in the presentation. So recommendation number 1, to use a mix and match design approach with a customization option available after we complete the mix and match applications. A recommendation to build only in front of the restaurant's linear street frontage. And again, I'll go through these in detail. Recommendation to return Bonanza Street to a two-way street, as it was previously prior to the pandemic. It's currently a one-way, and then follow the same frontage standards. And then to allow multiple patios, whether it be a private space, something in the public right-of-way, on the sidewalk, or one of these on-street structures, but to permit a cover of some sort only on one of those, not utilizing all. And then that the review and permitting of the structures will be at a staff level. So in looking at the first recommendation is to utilize a mix and match design approach with a customization option available. And let me just go through kind of what that looks like. So 3 options were discussed with the ad hoc and with WCD. And these are kind of that spectrum of kind of complexity. So on the far left, a custom option was presented to the ad hoc and to WCD. And this obviously being allowing the opportunity to fully customize. There would be some standardization in the foundation, but from there, a restaurant could basically build according to the brand of their restaurant, according to their own design, with some design standards obviously being introduced by staff as well. The other option was a mix and match option, and this is the one that we are recommending based on conversations with the ad hoc and WCD. And that would provide some preset elements that we would work with WCD on establishing. So those would be kind of preset, pre-selected for a restaurant to choose from based on options for the platform, the foundation, the railing around the perimeter, as well as the roof. And obviously some design standards introduced as a part of that as well for things like furnishings and signage and lighting and that kind of thing. And in the other end of that spectrum is just a template that would be pre-approved, construction ready, that would basically be the same design for the most part that restaurants would be allowed to use. And again, the recommendation based on the feedback from WCD and ad hoc and the ad hoc was to go with the mix and match option, being that it allows for the flexibility and integration of the restaurant's brand, but also provides still for some consistency because those elements are pre-chosen, pre-selected, and the restaurant would just basically choose from those pre-selected options and mix and match. Also, it'll be a quicker approval process, which we'll discuss later, that this could be at that staff level. So in terms of managing public space and striving for fairness in how public space is allocated, recommendation number 2 is to allow restaurants to build only in front of their restaurant space, not impeding on a neighboring business, addressing some of the issues that we've had through rebound with visibility to a neighboring business, and not having those restrictions. And I'll show this diagram, which kind of explains that more. So here's an example of a current situation on Locust Street where you have the diagonal parking. And so what you'll see here on that red line is that is where the current edge is of the pop-ups as they're allowed to construct along the diagonal line of the parking spaces there along Locust. So what is proposed here, and you can see that they shift. All of them shift basically into their neighboring, the frontage of their neighboring business. So in this case, you have a restaurant that their actual pop-up frontage is in front of, in this case, a personal service business. So what we are recommending is that these are basically squared off, not following the diagonal lines of the parking, and that they remain in front of the actual restaurant business. So it'll follow basically the linear frontage of each restaurant, and that will address that issue of it potentially going into a neighboring business by following that diagonal line. And the recommendation as well is just to make this a standard throughout. So this example that we're looking at here is on Locust, but this would be a standard throughout the downtown to square them off, not follow necessarily the diagonal lines, and then have them be placed only in front of the frontage of the restaurant. So the third recommendation is similar in addressing basically that same issue of returning Bonanza to a two-way street and following the frontage standards. And this is basically just to allow for consistency and a standard across all businesses. So this is just some photos to kind of illustrate this example. Bonanza actually provides an interesting case study as we're looking at frontage, as we're looking at allocation of public space. So what we have here is a business that's to the west of Commercial Lane, as well as a couple of businesses that are to the east of Commercial Lane and at the one way where it terminates at Main Street, going eastbound on Bonanza and terminating at Main Street. So we just wanted to illustrate here how the space, again, is allocated in front of the business down there to the lower left box, and then how it also kind of spreads out basically into the adjacent business. So the recommendation to address this is to, again, return this to the two-way street, opening up parking, as well as readjusting those businesses to be just in front of the linear frontage of the restaurant. And this is the one where we did not receive consensus from amongst the ad hoc or WCD. So the next recommendation is to allow for the multiple patios, again, being in the public right-of-way, or if it's on a private property, or the on-street structure, but limiting the patio covers to only one. And this is just to improve the visibility. Again, one of the issues that we've constantly tried to address as a part of Rebound, and then maintain an open feel for that pedestrian experience. And just a couple of examples here of patio covers that are covering the sidewalk, as well as a cover in their Rebound pop-up, and just the feel that gives and the experience that gives to the pedestrian walking along the sidewalk, as well as what it could look like from a standpoint of having only one cover. In this case, it's on a structure in the far right photo, and opening up that space a little bit. It also addresses the visibility to the neighboring business to not have multiple covers that could potentially, again, obstruct visibility to that neighboring business. And then the last recommendation is if we do move forward with the mix and match approach, that approval would be at a staff level. This obviously will expedite and streamline the process, but also given that we will have input from WCD and from the business community on what those elements will be, we'll be able to approve that more quickly, and again, at a staff level. But I will add that custom structures will still require, because they are custom and potentially pretty complex, will still require Design Review Commission review. So as Terry mentioned, we are at this stage now of going through the structure design as well as how we manage the public space. What we'll be coming back to council with next is looking at structures and design options and the impact to parking in the private lots, in the private parking lots, the fee structure, and then different elements that we'd be looking at introducing for how do we best manage now these new spaces. What are some new permitting that we might need to have in place in order to best manage these spaces. We'll be looking at operating hours, looking at noise regulations. So these are the things that we'll be coming back to council and discussing with the ad hoc over the next few weeks as well. One of the things I also do want to add is the construction project that is proposed, actually planned for Locust. This is something that is being done by East Bay Mud. It's something that we, as staff, had worked with them to delay. This is something that they had planned for a while. We worked with them to delay during the pandemic, and obviously needing that space on Locust for the restaurants to be able to operate. They can no longer delay this, and it's just needed improvements that are required to the water line there. So that will impact, obviously, the businesses along Locust, potentially requiring for an extension of the rebound program and in some kind of temporary allowance for outdoor dining while this construction is taking place. And we also recently learned that it will also impact Bonanza and to California also. So those are things that we'll have to take into consideration for the businesses along those areas as well. And with that, just a quick recap on the recommendations. Again, the mix and match design approach, building in front of the linear street frontage of the restaurant, returning Bonanza to its two-way street and then following that same standard of the linear street frontage, allowing for multiple patios but a cover on only one of those, and then at a staff level having the review and approval. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mayor Francois, for questions and any discussion you might.
Thank you, Ms. Hannah. Any questions for Ms. Hannah or Ms. Kilgore? Councilmember Darling.
Just a couple quick ones. Thank you for, you guys have obviously been working hard on this, and I like the word pods, even though it did make me think of those things that sat in my driveway while we were doing a remodel.
Or something from outer space.
Yeah, the switching over so that you have a rectangular pod, does that have a substantial effect on how many parking spots we're losing, or is it kind of neutral? I'm not good geometrically at whether or not.
It actually kind of allows for, well, obviously it allows for more parking spaces available because as we were, especially on Locust, trying to allow the structures to be built along those diagonal lines, it would take, say, 2.5 spaces. And so as we're squaring them off, we're allowing for just within that frontage. And if it leaves a half space, then we would work with WCD potentially for activation of that space. But it, in some cases, will bring back a full parking space.
Okay, that was going to be my next.
I'm sorry, if I could just chime in. So we also have some flexibility in talking with our traffic engineering division. As we look at the construction on Locust, it's a moment in time where we could also potentially restripe and kind of move some of the meters around. So it's going to be, on a certain block, you may lose a couple spaces, but you may gain because not all the spaces on Locust are the same size either. So it's a chance for us to do a little truing up, if you will. But we don't think any loss would be material in amount.
Okay, thanks. And then on the mix and match, as far as the materials that you're selecting up front, is there going to be a role for the Design Review Commission in looking at those, or are you going to be working more with the Walnut Creek Downtown?
Yeah, the suggestion was that we would work with Walnut Creek Downtown to establish those elements. We would bring those to the ad hoc as well, and can bring those back to council as well before those are finalized. But the plan was to use the continued and ongoing partnership that we have with WCD to make sure that we are selecting elements that are high quality, high standard, but are also cost effective for the restaurants to implement.
And then on the no consensus on Bonanza, I'm assuming we'll hear that in public comment, but is it that some restaurants want to keep the bigger area and some local businesses want them to move back, or?
Well, it's more so having to do with what you like subjectively in terms of the feel there. Obviously, it does allow those restaurants that are on the east side of Commercial Lane to expand into the center line, providing more space. But there's also the consideration of, how do we consider fairness in terms of the distribution and allocation of public space. It is the only street that has that kind of space allocation, except for one I should mention is Lincoln, which is the other one that we're looking at, that lends itself more so to a plaza, to potential bike lanes, so a little more activation on that street if it remains closed, which was the initial recommendation in that as is with traffic circulation. Bonanza is just a unique situation that you know, it depends on what you appreciate in terms of the environment and what's created over there.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Haskell, any questions?
Thank you. I was on the committee and I wore out my questions there.
Terrific. Why don't we go to Councilmember Wilk next?
Great, thank you. And I also have most of my questions that were during the committee, but I do have a question regarding the outdoor dining spaces that we were concerned about not being used. There were a few restaurants that had spaces and it didn't look like they'd been used in quite a while. I wanted to see what's the procedure for either ensuring that they are used or ensuring that they're then removed and the public right of way is given back to the parkers.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilk. So the entire rebound journey has been a learning experience. We tried some things that worked great and some things we learned a few lessons on. And I think one of the things we have learned is the need to be more specific with the expectations that these spaces will be activated. And that will be written into the program guidelines, into whatever license agreement is issued for these spaces. We understand and we've seen the impacts of what it looks like when they are not activated and become basically storage areas. And so we have begun actively intervening with this round of renewals of licenses through June 30. We've been talking with several of the property owners, the business owners, and some we've actually started the process of removing their spaces for non-use. But as we look at the more permanent structure process, we will be baking in a more permanent mechanism to ensure that those are activated.
Great, thank you. And the only other question I had was partly to do with Bonanza, and I think there's a couple of other spaces where some of the outdoor dining are being allowed to expand into next door businesses with the permission of those landlords and tenants. And I just wanted to see if you'd had an opportunity to speak with those individual businesses about this particular recommendation.
Not on a one-on-one basis. Part of the journey of Rebound has been, we did let people expand. Many of the other businesses were closed. And so we took advantage of as much square footage as we possibly could to help our restaurants. And what we saw as more businesses reopened was that there were some places where there were neighbors and property owners who were amenable to sharing the space and others where they were not. And so we had to go back and right-size some of these pop-ups to current conditions. The concern as we look ahead to a permanent installation, we'll be setting up foundations. We'll be doing a significant amount of engineering work, and it's reasonable to expect that over a 5 to 10 year horizon, there will be changes in property ownership and even businesses. So it's a little harder to pick up and move an installation of this type than it is the tents and fences and barrels we have out there now. So it's obviously a judgment call here, but our staff's recommendation is that we stick to having the the pods in front of the business that they serve, instead of being more fluid like we were during the temporary program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all of the, wait, I have no one to look at what's going on. There. So I have a number of questions. On the mix and match option, just to ensure that I understand, what we're going to be offering is a few railing options, roofing options, and platform options, and you could mix and match those. You could take A, B, and C.
Yes,
Is that
exactly.
correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What is the difference between a platform and a foundation? Because your slide that showed foundation, we're assuming a difference between the two?
I'm using that term interchangeably. The thing that will be standard across all of them is a barrier. And our engineering team is determining what that traffic safety barrier will be. that will be standard across all the pods. But the platform and the foundation, I'm using that term interchangeably, and that's where there would be different options for a restaurant to choose from.
Actually, can I jump in? That I have a slight modification to that. So the raised curb, like if you think about what currently exists in front of Rooted, that actually is the foundation that we're talking about. So that is what's going to give these their structural support, especially if you look at installing a roof. The platform is really more kind of the flooring. So it would be, you know, it probably is plywood or some sort of variation therein, but then it becomes about the decorative elements, right? Do you put down a pretty pattern on it? Do you put down a faux wood look? Or are you just going to do green grass carpet? That's the kind of, you know, look and feel that they're going to be looking at. But every one of these versions has one of those raised 18-foot curb foundations that this entire structure will sit on. And that's consistent across the, I'm sorry?
You meant 18 inch.
Did I say feet? Sorry, that would be really tall,
be very
not
tall.
18 feet.
Like, that's a
We're gonna
floor
build
and
a
half, 2
moat.
floors.
18 inches, sorry. And then that's consistent across the mix and match as well as the custom. Everybody would have the same type of curb foundation structure.
And that's from a safety standpoint, basically.
Correct. And what it does for the diners is raises them up off of the level of travel. So it's not by a lot, but it's enough that it's a buffer for the dining.
And I assume the larger that these might be, the more likely that there is not only a perimeter foundation, but some type of interior cross foundational piece so that it doesn't sag in the middle.
Yeah, and that's part of what we've been busy working with our engineering team on is how do we set this up so it's easily replicatable, is that a word? And is consistent and solid structurally. So.
And I'll just add really quickly also, and one of the pieces of feedback that we received from the ad hoc is to make it that standard foundation across the board, whether they have a roof or not. So if they decide to add a roof, they will still have that strong structural foundation.
So then on the flip side, since this is going to have a strong structural foundation, how do we ensure that it is easy to, or how difficult will it be to move or remove should the business change? Or should the business fail to pay its rent to the city for the use of the public right-of-way?
It's not impossible, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And so we would want to have to do that sparingly. In some cases, if the business no longer wanted to use it or wasn't paying their fees, we could transition it into some public space and just have some, you know, gathering areas in the space. Obviously, too many of those and they become a whole other work program. So we would have to be judicious. Some of them we might just remove. One of the recommendations from the city attorney's office is to have some, and the city engineer, is to have some provision in the license where it's the responsibility of either the business owner or property owner, we don't have that worked out yet, to remove it when the business leaves. At the city's option. So the city could decide, no, leave that one, we have a purpose for it or a utility, or we're willing to let it float for a while. But we don't know what that mechanism would look like at this point.
Okay, thank you. The next question relates to recommendation number 2. I know you've looked at this. I appreciate the recommendation. What if there are bulb outs in the street, curb cuts, vis-a-vis what would typically be probably 2 parking spaces in front of the restaurant?
Yeah, one of the things that we, our traffic engineer is doing as well is looking at where reasonably can these go based on those kinds of factors, as well as traffic visibility. So she's working on a map to provide that for us as well to see where there might be some existing restrictions in place, whether it be from a visibility standpoint or, as you mentioned, some bulb outs.
Is it safe for me to can I be confident that we're also looking at where trash pickups occur so that this doesn't become?
Yes.
You walk downtown about 7 a.m. on any given morning, you discover that there's a lot of getting out of the truck, moving the cans, et cetera.
Right, exactly. That's been one of the learned lessons through Rebound, is how do we maintain that access for both cleanliness of the structures themselves, of the on-street spaces themselves, the pop-ups as they are currently, as well as the access that we need along Commercial Lane and other points for maintaining the downtown.
Related to, you called them canopies or roofs over patios, but your photos actually weren't patios, they were sidewalks, and they were overhangs or canopies. So can we be a little clearer? Because I think it's hard to say, oh, you have an overhang over the public sidewalk, and therefore you can't have a roof on the pod.
Yes,
You're
we were,
tracking.
yeah, I'm following what you're saying. Yeah, our pictures are not perfect, but we were trying to get you as close to what we're concerned about as we could. We do not have a lot of built covers right now on either the behind the sidewalk patios. But what we're seeing is that where we do have the overhangs next to the outdoor dining temporary pop-ups, you can start to see what we're concerned about, which is a tunneling effect and a darkness effect. So these pictures are not perfect, but that we were trying to show to you that, on the right-hand picture, it's got one roof and there's a patio adjacent that's open air, and it just feels different than if there is an overhang or cover adjacent or nearby to another covered structure. Obviously, that's about an experience decision and a design aesthetic. We just wanted to make that choice point clear to the council as we look forward.
So, but we really are talking about private patios, not sidewalks.
Correct, but as we've seen, in some places we already have overhangs.
I understand there are canopies on one building downtown, and then, okay. I'll just leave it there. I got the clarification. In terms of review of the request for custom, it said in two places, both in the presentation and then later in the document, that they would come after everybody else was handled. Did I understand that correctly? And what if it takes 6 months for all? When is everything handled for the mix and match? Is there a time limit that you've already thought of?
Yes, so we're in the process of hiring an architect to help us select some options. The goal is to have those mix and match options to be vetted by the ad hoc and the WCD representatives. Early summer is kind of the estimate that I've been told.
Okay,
yes, early summer.
Let me actually ask my question a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that by Labor Day, we had the mix and match options ready to go. Everything was done. We knew what we were going to charge for use of the public right of way. All the issues were addressed. A gun goes off and says, bad analogy probably, but the shot clock goes off and everybody can apply. How long is that first round expected to take before somebody who wants to do a custom one? How long does the custom one have to wait? Well, every Tom, Dick, and Harry that I'm thinking about it, maybe I'll consider it November. Are we going to put a time limit on how long we make the custom ones wait?
Yeah, we'd have to set some time around that. And what we didn't go into depth on, because we don't have great detail from East Bay Mud yet, is their planned construction is January to June of 23, is what we're being told now. And what we don't know is exactly how they're going to come in and do all their construction on Bonanza in California and how that factors into Locust. So what we're tentatively thinking, and we don't have the details for you this evening, is that perhaps we have to phase this, where it's Main Street goes first, and we do first the mix and matches on Main Street, and then we can do the customs on Main Street. And then we have a lot of time to spend on thinking about design and implementation on Locust and Bonanza potentially. And our tentative thinking is that obviously we may have to extend the pop-ups during that time. But not knowing East Bay Mud's schedule and kind of phasing in detail, we're just conjecturing at this point. That's our hypothetical schedule.
In your conversations, did you have any discussion of when it goes through a custom process and goes through design review, if they have where the appeal goes? Or I'll put it this way, warning, we have to know where it goes on appeal. Right now, everything from DRC goes to Planning Commission. And my last question is really a question for the city attorney. Do these approvals, I don't think they do, go with the land and become permanent?
No, they can be orchestrated as temporary approvals. So they wouldn't run with the land in the common conditional use permit sense.
Besides which they're on our public right of way, but I
Correct.
mean, when we get to the other renditions of these, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Good questions. I have reduced mine to a few. On the mix and match, there was a statement that, or on one of the slides, that the template is construction ready. How close to construction ready are the mix and match? Are you able to quantify that? The components are there, just the plan or schematic isn't?
Exactly. Yeah, are you saying currently how?
Just, I'm wondering, is there, I guess what the question is getting at, is there some sort of hybrid where there's a mix and match with a template that's more construction ready than just mix and match?
So the mix and match kind of is that, because we will have set the structural standards that we're trying to achieve. And so part of what will be decided is, you can meet those structural standards with, I'm making up examples here, with wood posts or metal, steel posts, or I don't know what else you could build something out of. Tin cans?
2x4s.
2x4s. Clearly not the construction person. But we will not be giving anyone mix and match options that are not buildable, that do not meet the structural requirements.
Okay.
And the reason I hesitate is because the template doesn't allow for the customization, whereas the mix and match does.
Okay.
The template is just straight build from the design, from the drawings.
And then from a timing standpoint, it's helpful to hear about Locust. And is the thought, and maybe I know that we'll hear some public comment on this, but some concerns that I've heard raised is, well, rebound ends the end of June, and then what happens? So the idea is staff would recommend an extension of rebound. Is that likely going to happen through this year? And then we're looking at this program rolling out next year?
Yes, we're definitely going to have to extend rebound at least once, and then we're looking ahead to that transition. And so remembering that our rebound superpowers are tied to our emergency orders, we know we don't want those to go on forever if the state rescinds theirs. So we're talking with the city attorney's office about what are our other options. Could you adopt a different kind of temporary program to continue to extend this out? That's going to be especially important as we look ahead to the non-downtown locations. We've really cited this discussion around downtown because we have, with the parking and lieu program and some other existing programs, we've got a little more flexibility right in the core downtown. But for our friends who are out in the shopping centers or outlying areas, we have more discussions to be had around how we could help them make the transition too. And it's a little bit different because they're on separate zoning districts and have a slightly different path. So long story short, we're going to have some of these superpowers extend out. Does it stay exactly in the rebound program format, or do we bring you a slightly different program? We're not sure yet, but we do know that we need to extend the pop-ups at a minimum to help us through this transition.
Okay.
And we also have to do that because of what's happening on Locust and the construction taking place there.
I want to be Aquaman when we extend our superpowers. And then, let's see. I had one. Well, the last question is there a reason why we can't have the mix and match and the customization go in tandem? Are we loading up too much staff with this? We can't separate the two functions, or?
Yes, and one, it's loading up staff. We're trying to focus our efforts on getting kind of that mix and match option built, and then we can pivot a little bit easier to dealing with the customization requests. And then, it's in a practical level, it's helpful for us to have had the discussions around what the mix and match is going to look like. So DRC or whoever hears these customization reviews has an idea of what it might be next to, right? Otherwise, you're really talking about everything being custom in an accidental way. So getting the mix and match defined. So, let's say we picked a, purple, green, and blue palette. DRC is going to want to know that when they're looking at a customization that's maybe like highlighter yellow. So figuring out that mix and match palette, wow, say that fast 10 times, helps us evaluate those custom options more credibly.
All right, well, thank you both for a great report and answering all the questions. At this time, I'm going to open up the public comment.
Can we take like 2 minutes?
Absolutely. We're going to take, why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Thank you. Cassidy's for SB 9.
Good evening and welcome back to the March 15th regular meeting of the City Council. We're on the Downtown Next Study Session, Part 2. And we're opening the public comment at this point. If any member of the public wishes to provide public comments, please use the raise hand feature, press *9 if you're connected by audio only. We're going to start by taking public comment from folks that are here in the audience, and then we'll go to Zoom. But again, if you're on Zoom, please register your intent to speak by raising your hand or pressing *9. At this time, each speaker will have 2 minutes to make their remarks. And we'll go to Mr. Bennett to lead us off.
Hi, this is Pete Bennett. Are you worried about this? What about my broken nose? Yeah, how about my broken ribs? What about this attempted murder in the library? Which is more important? Do you remember me getting attacked in the farmer's market over 10 years ago? You were there. Jesus. One of your officers covered it up. Officer Rabanowitz. Okay? The other officer pulled a gun on me. A bunch of them arrested me. I slept in those pods to stay alive. The people in this town come out on top. My cars get towed away. I was going to use that truck to go to Utah to get my $1 million trust that can't get processed here, and they killed the family. I try to run for public office, and I get chased out of City Hall with guns. Do you know that, Mr. Mattis, the city attorney, that I had guns pulled on me when I tried to run for public office? Do you know that your firm sued Southern Pacific and worked with them, and they killed my witness with the help of Richard Rainey, the coroner? That's how I lost millions in 1990. They covered it up. Mark Kuhn and I were working on that, and he jumped off a building. This has gone on for so long. Everybody wins. Roll the roulette, and I go to jail. I get beaten up in jail. I get attacked. I get thrown through windows in downtown Walnut Creek. And it's always my fault. You tow away my cars. Always my fault. Every time. For 20, 30 years.
Okay, do we have any further public comment on Downtown Next Part 2? I'd welcome any members of the public that would like to provide comment to please come to the lectern.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Joelle Skimia, co-owner of Havana on Bonanza Street. So my interest tonight lies in the suggestion that Bonanza Street is returned to two-way traffic versus being one-way for the last couple years. I guess my first question is the reasoning behind it, because from our viewpoint, there appears to be little or no traffic congestion due to the one-way traffic. We certainly, previous to this, we had complaints of no parking in Walnut Creek consistently that we would hear about at our business. And oddly enough, that has gone away. We don't hear about guests complaining about no parking anymore at all. I'm not really sure how they're getting there. I think people are using Uber a lot more nowadays, which is great. I think people are just happy to be out and about. But I've also found that in the last couple of years, there is just a lot more interest, certainly the last 1 year, in going back to Walnut Creek, to being in downtown. We struggled for a long time with people saying, you know, we've got restaurants in Danville now, we have restaurants in Alamo, we have restaurants in Lafayette, and we weren't hearing of those customers coming to Walnut Creek. They would complain about parking, but they would also just say, we've got vibrant, you know, new restaurants in our own towns. And now those people are all coming back to Walnut Creek. And yes, we have a very large space at Havana, and we're really thankful to Walnut Creek for it. It's been great for us, but it's also been a real pain in the ass in a lot of ways. But when I look at it from the city's perspective, we have generated a lot of additional revenue and tax dollars because of it, far more than what I think the parking spaces could bring about. But more so, I feel like we have definitely aided in the way that Walnut Creek is looked at now with all these outdoor dining restaurants, and it's put us back on the map as a place that people want to come to, not just people that live close to Walnut Creek.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, Councilmember Darling has a
I had a quick
question for you.
question. Come back. You get extra time when I ask a question. Have you talked about, does your pop-up extend in front of your neighbors, and how is the?
It does, yes. We have lost some of our space directly outside of our front door, which is actually awkward because they decorate their pop-up a lot differently than ours. And so our space starts like 10 feet to the left of our front door and then continues down the street. And then we do have in front of Music Exchange.
Okay, and have you discussed that with Music Exchange? Are they?
Personally, my partner here.
He has signed off on it with each rebound step.
Okay.
Yeah, he's been okay with it.
He's been very supportive.
I've always been curious how you guys split it up there. 'cause it
Yeah,
seemed
we've
like it
been
was
very lucky
slightly
in that
off.
respect, where there's no issue and problem. There's no problem with us and Capullo, which is right next to us, who uses more of our space too.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any other public comments?
Good evening, council members. Brian Hirahara, president of Walnut Creek Downtown. First of all, I just want to thank you and staff and Terry and Colette. They've really done a lot of work on this. It's a very important issue, obviously, for the restaurants downtown, and they've really engaged Walnut Creek Downtown and our board, so we really appreciate the input. The one issue that Joelle mentioned, and we all struggled with and discussed with Terry and Colette, it's challenging on Bonanza. It's kind of a little bit of an anomaly because of the location, and they definitely have brought a lot of activity to that area. So we struggled with how, if it's going to go from just all the way down to Music Exchange, just to their frontage, and in particular, Capullo's a very narrow frontage. You have to remember that's probably the fourth restaurant that it's been. I think partly is because of how narrow it is. So one possibility that we were struggling with, if there's a way to, if it's within their frontage, to at least keep it one way. I think people have adjusted to that traffic pattern. I was just talking to Terry that we had proposed having some pickup stalls on the Music Exchange frontage. And she mentioned that traffic has mentioned that there's challenges of illegal movements of getting out of there. So that really doesn't work. So maybe there's a way, we couldn't come up with anything yet, but we were thinking about if there's another way we can do some type of public benefit. Maybe it's a stage area and maybe some public art, a little pop-up there, so that we can preserve that dining area, because depending on where you go on if it's frontage only, again, and it goes to two-way, it'll be small. There's the challenges of being equitable to the rest of the restaurants as well, but I think it's a little bit of a unique situation there, and it's becoming a really active area. So we're open to brainstorming of ways of activating that area if you so choose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirahara. Any other comments?
Hello, I'm Rola Gaben. I own Broderick Walnut Creek, obviously. Just wanted to say really thank you for allowing us to have our pop-ups. COVID was not good to us, and our industry kind of took a pretty hard hit through COVID. So what happened downtown and what you allowed us to create with the pop-ups really saved my business. So thank you for that. I look forward to hearing more and learning more about what the requirement's going to be to stay in the current pop-ups. I didn't know about the East Bay Mud project, so I was a little bit disturbed about that. To see a little bit more of what they want to do and how long it's going to take is going to be interesting. But I feel like Locust needs a facelift quickly with the rebound. There's a lot of pop-ups, on that street. So I feel like we just need to come up with some sort of a approved design through the city and present it to the business owners so we can, you know, take actions of what needs to be done. But I think East Bay Mud is going to be a problematic for the next year or so. So, but anyway, I'm here to support, and I love what you guys have done and what you've allowed us to do. And I know that downtown is vibrant, a lot more vibrant today than it was pre-COVID because of what's going on downtown. So thank you for that, and look forward to hearing more about your plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public speakers on this item in the chamber? Not seeing any, so we'll turn to Zoom.
Yes, we have Nate P.
Hello. My name is Nate Pergamit. I am a Walnut Creek resident, lived here all my life. I would just like to say I'm a little shocked you're not considering closing any of the streets. I know that other cities have closed the streets to great effect. And when I'm in places like San Francisco, I can see for myself the significantly increased foot traffic to businesses for streets that have closed to vehicles. And honestly, I would recommend doing the same in our downtown. I think that would be best and safest for all the businesses and all the patrons involved. I would recommend all the streets between Civic and Mount Diablo be closed between the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. This will allow for businesses to receive packages and whatnot during the evening, but will keep people safe while they're dining outdoors during the day. And the only reason I believe, not the only reason, but I believe this is a good idea. I've read articles from people who have been in car accidents in these outdoor dining areas where they have, where their outdoor dining has been hit by vehicles while they were eating. And every single one of them has said they would prefer to keep the outdoor dining and lose the cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pergamit.
And no additional hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and close the public comment period and bring it back to the council if there are any final clarifying questions of staff. Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Thank you. Terry, the recommendation regarding Bonanza, was it no outdoor dining on Bonanza, or was it only in the parking spaces so that two-way traffic could be returned the way it is on Main Street?
It was the latter, and it really is stemming from sort of this fairness principle. Our original recommendation in January was to keep the as-is condition, and as we worked more with the ad hoc and on the staff teams, we realized, oh, we're proposing these standards for elsewhere in downtown, but they don't really fit on Bonanza, and they don't fit on Lincoln. So we need to have more discussion around those. That's why we're bringing this item back. So it would be, there is still outdoor dining in the parking spaces along the frontage.
Thank you for the clarification.
So, yeah, Councilmember Darling.
Just to follow up on that, the parking spots where there's angled parking, they'll have a bigger pop-up in those areas. Is that a bigger dimension than the parallel spots?
Space depths are different, yeah, on Main and Locust. So if they're parallel, they're a certain width, and if they're angled, they're a certain depth, I guess. So yes, they will be different dimensions. We're recommending the rectangular shape. We're finding the points don't really get used. They just end up with a plant or a chair or something. And by squaring them up, hopefully it creates more usable space for the restaurants.
But even if we're just going rectangular. There'll be different depths of rectangular depending on where it is.
Yeah, like an old house, nothing downtown is exactly the same dimension and nothing is like right angles. So there's going to be, while we're talking about standardization, we're obviously going to have to tweak in a few places where there's bulb outs and get a little creative around existing trees and.
We'll call that texture.
Yes, patina, texture, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a process question. In terms of the Bonanza, where does that fit in terms of being a critical path item? Obviously, you need direction from us, and I'm asking it in light of the East Bay mud work, which I think will extend down Bonanza. It seems like what staff really needs at this juncture is the mix and match design approach and maybe some more of these design elements, but I'm checking with both of you to confirm that that's true.
I think that's true. We can take some time on the Bonanza decision if need be. The others are critical path items. I think that's a great way to say that we need to know the answers to that so we can get to the architects and get designing. Bonanza, we could certainly return at a different date and discuss further.
Then my suggestion would be that we do that. I think there's consensus among us, among WCD and the ad hoc with the 4 other items, and that we continue the discussion on Bonanza. We can have input.
The consensus is a non-consensus.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's fair. I was going to actually suggest that myself, because I think it's complex, and sometimes what works for 90% of the world doesn't work for 10% of the world perfectly. So, yeah, let's not just storm our way through and not get it right. We want to get it right because we're looking at a 5 to 10 year window in all of this. So you have my word for my part. It will always be as thoughtful as I can put it together. Do you want additional, do you feel like you have enough information? Or do you want more comments?
I mean, as long as the council's clear that the recommendations 1, 2, 4, and 5, the council's in agreement with, and then we would revisit item 3, if that's a general consensus. I can't see the 2 council members remotely if they are nodding their heads or not, but I'm not hearing them shout. Well, we do. we do. But if it were split, I would want a motion if that's the case.
So could I suggest that we actually, if we're going to set aside 3 for the time being, but at least go through 1, 2, 4, and 5 and see if we have any comments as well? Because one of these is actually not a design question, it's a processing question and a timing question, which is number 5.
I'm okay with that. It's 9 p.m. here, so. Do you want to, we could start with, let's start with number 1, mix and match design approach. Any council members have any comments that they haven't already made? Councilmember Darling.
I like the mix and match approach. I think it gets us to where we were looking to go, which is eclectic patina, but yet not shabby. So I like it.
Do you like the eclectic patina?
Yeah, no, I like the phrase.
But not shabby.
I agree with the concept.
I'm in alignment too. I like the mix and match approach. If there was a way for customization to go in tandem, I'd be in support of that, but I understand the constraints, the staff constraints, particularly with that. Mayor Pro Tem Silva?
I agree with the mix and match. My only issue is that we ensure, as we make these structures more permanent, that we have a plan, and as part of the agreement process, we know what we're going to do when when a business moves, changes, et cetera.
And Councilmember Wilk.
Agreed.
Okay, item 2 was build only in front of the restaurant's linear street frontage.
I like rectangles. And I think as long as you're looking at it and if you have a parking spot and then have a little extra area in there, that we have something in there that activates it and it's clear who's responsible for maintaining that, whether it's the city or because I've noticed downtown, there's some of the nooks and crannies that collect debris.
Do you like rectangles?
I like many shapes, but yeah, I think for this particular thing, in order to keep the vision looking down the street and the aura of what's going on, I think a consistency, at least in shape, is important.
Mayor Pro Tem Silva?
I like the rectangular, but I think this also was only in front of the business. Am I wrong?
You're right.
Okay, I like that too. I think for the long haul, we cannot be getting gentlemen's agreements or, agreements that cannot be upheld over the long haul.
Councilmember Wilk?
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Of course, we've got the exception with number 3 on Bonanza and a couple of other areas too that are throughout the city, but those are the exception, not the rule. If we look at the majority of them, meaning 90% plus, then yes, I agree with rectangles.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point in terms of Bonanza. We're going to revisit that, but I think that it would still be that it would be in front of the business's frontage, and whether or not that extra area is activated, I guess remains to be seen, and whether the business extends to the middle of the street as opposed to just the parking. I kind of have a question about how you would monetize the half parking spaces, but I'll leave that to you brilliant women to figure out.
We'll be coming back with that for further discussion, either April 19th or May 3rd.
Okay. We're going to skip over number 3, returning Bonanza to two-way street, to number 4, allowing multiple patios but limiting covers to 1. Mayor Pro Tem Silva, you had good comments on this previously. Do you want to lead this off?
I would agree with that if we're talking about outdoor dining space. And I think we are getting into a very big design issue if we're addressing an overhang on a building over a sidewalk, or we're trying to get one restaurant not to have an outdoor patio with a roof, and suddenly their canopy that was installed by the landlord is in question and they can't take the canopy down. So I think we have to isolate, be very precise here what we're doing.
That makes sense to me. I'm in agreement with that. Outdoor dining only, not having multiple covers.
Maybe there's a better way if we frame it around sidewalk ambience and attractiveness to the whole area, or that's probably too nebulous. Yeah. Okay, well then, forget I said it.
I agree with, I think I agree with Cindy Silva. Let's look at dining areas and having one overhead per dining area. And then if you have an area where there is a canopy over the sidewalk, working towards the light, but not making it a hard and fast, no, you can't have that if you have that. Because I think that without the overhead structure, a lot of dining will not end up getting used. And so don't want to be too restrictive in that regard.
Can I say something here also? I think if we were to get into, oh, you can't do that because your canopy over the sidewalk is wrong, we're in design review. That is not mix and match. And that can't be done ministerially because it's going to cause a lot of consternation.
That's a good comment. And I think if we limit the covers, it still allows for umbrellas or other types of kind of more temporary shade coverings without creating that tunnel effect that we're trying to avoid. Councilmember Wilk, anything to add on multiple covers?
Yeah, I agree with the consensus on this, and I can understand that. We did skip over 3, and everybody else gave a couple of comments on that. I just wanted to quickly say, I'd like staff to just recognize those areas that really are active and vibrant areas. And since we've made the decision to continue with outdoor dining and look at this in a more permanent basis, let's not do a disservice to people and visitors to downtown, or the atmosphere that we're trying to do and just trying to be overly fair with everything. Let's do what's best for Walnut Creek. And that's all I would really ask as we look toward some of the exceptions that are out there. In this particular instance with the coverings, I would agree.
Would anyone else like to comment on number 3, even though we're not taking a formal position on the recommendation at this point? Nope. Okay. Staff, do you have what you need? Do you need to?
Number 5.
Oh, well, we should talk about number 5. Come on. So this is the ministerial
9:30.
approval process.
I assure you, it's later than that where I am.
That was the joke, Cindy.
I mean, picking up on Councilmember Darling's point earlier, I wonder, is it worth having 2 design review commissioners, an ad hoc of the design review involved in this process?
Certainly an option. We were trying to propose what we thought would be most expeditious, but we could certainly add in some sort of subcommittee. That would be a great addition, I think.
I want to talk to my colleagues and see what they think.
Well, I'm not sure. I missed the discussion, so would you kind of share it with me?
It was more of a question.
My question was whether or not design review would get folded into it, but it sounds like rather than having somebody come to the city and propose it, the city is engaging the services of an architect to come up with the mix and match, which alleviated my concern for the involvement of design review, because it's not somebody else coming to us, it's us saying this is what we want to do, and presumably we're hiring a good architect.
We're hiring a good architect, and we'll also be vetting this with Walnut Creek Downtown. So we're going to have multiple sets of eyes on it.
Yeah, we of the Rebound Committee have taken to heart the fact that we have a coalition in Walnut Creek that is going to care about Walnut Creek, and that started with the coalition of the chamber and the Walnut Creek Downtown, and I truly, truly, deeply believe that we should, as the city, be one of the active partners in that coalition, and so that is the standard that I'm trying to get, and in this particular case, I think the team of the coalition, if you have an issue with our choices of how we're putting it together, we want your feedback desperately. And so, yeah, please let us know.
And if I can just say that we did actually bring this up during our ad hoc committee, and we talked about the potentially design review being involved. And for all the reasons that Terry just stated and that Luella just mentioned as well, we decided it would be more expeditious and just a better opportunity in being able to move forward without getting bogged down in all the other areas. So we felt pretty comfortable on the Rebound Committee of this going through with Walnut Creek Downtown, an architect and staff.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thanks for all that feedback. Mayor Pro Tem Silva.
Yeah, thank you. I think my computer's getting tired. I appreciate all of this. I think we need to, the next time we see this, we need to have a clear timing plan, because I can see where we're going to have people who want to do custom pods who are going to be left hanging while a bunch of people are doing mix and match and kind of in the way. So I really think the principle should be that the pop-ups are okay until the permanent program is ready, approved, and that a certain number or a certain amount of time at that point is allowed for interested restaurants to submit an application, get it approved and get it constructed. But at that point, we've got to start the custom ones. But I think we have to also ensure that these pop-ups, the temporary ones, are allowed until everybody can get through our queue.
Are you comfortable with having design review be part of the queue for the customs? Because
Absolutely.
I think that's important.
That is important. And I think we're going to have to explain very carefully to design review why they're not looking at the off-the-shelf solution.
Okay, well, I think we're all in alignment that it should remain, mix and match, and should remain a ministerial staff level review process with customization, with design review oversight to follow. And do you have the input that you need from the council on this item?
We do very much. Thank you. That was very helpful input. So just to clarify our next steps, we're going to take this back, get to work with the architects and WCD, starting to refine the program, how we would propose the application process rolling, what other kind of rules, regulations, what kind of agreements, licenses we might set up. And you'll see us, as I mentioned, back either in late April, early May, talking about fees, talking about the permitting process in some more depth, and likely with the extension of rebound in hand, asking council to give us that ability to float with the pop-ups until such time as we're ready with the real permanent program. So more coming soon. We will be back. This isn't the end of the discussion, but this was really helpful foundational information and guidance. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate how thoughtful and deliberate both of you have been and collaborative with the business community. And just, I think we all want to convey our assurances to the business community and the restaurant owners that outdoor dining is here to stay. And until we get the permanent guidelines in place, that the temporary program will remain, rest assured of that. And we'll be working diligently and thoughtfully on getting those permanent guidelines in place. So with that, we'll close the item, and the next item on the agenda is adjournment of the city council meeting. We are adjourned.